My parents gave my brother my car, then I reported it stolen. My parents thought they were just giving my brother a nice gift. A grand gesture to help him out. The problem was my car. So, I did the only thing I could think of, the only option they left me. I reported it stolen. And that single decision, that one phone call, kicked off a legal and emotional firestorm that could have sent me to jail and ripped my family apart for good. This is the story of how my family's sense of entitlement turned into a criminal matter, and how I had to choose between my own self-respect and the people I was supposed to trust most. Okay, so to really understand this whole disaster, you need to understand that this isn't just about a car. It's about what that car represented to me. It was the physical proof of my independence, a monument to my hard work. The first truly significant thing I had ever earned and owned entirely by myself. It was a 2021 Honda Civic, nothing outrageously fancy, but it was mine. I didn't get a sweet 16 car, I didn't get a graduation present. I worked for it. I spent my entire last year of college working 2 jobs. I was bussing tables on weekends, dealing with demanding customers and sticky floors until 2 a.m., and then I was up at dawn to get to my weeknight job stocking shelves at a grocery store. I lived on instant noodles and free coffee from the break room. I missed parties, I missed hanging out with friends, all so I could scrape together every single dollar for the down payment. I spent months buried in consumer reports and car blogs, researching reliability and safety ratings. I walked into that dealership alone, armed with my research, and negotiated the price myself. And every single monthly payment, every insurance bill, came straight from my bank account. A painful but proud reminder of my achievement. That car was my pride and joy. It wasn't just a way to get from A to B. It was proof that I could stand on my own 2 feet. This is crucial because, in my family, I was always the one who had to stand on my own 2 feet. I have a younger brother. Let's call him Kevin, and to put it mildly, he is the golden child. While I was clocking in for my second shift, Kevin was, well, finding himself, which was a convenient euphemism for playing video games and job hopping. While I was meticulously budgeting every penny, he was constantly calling our parents for money to cover his latest misadventure. And they always gave it. His rent would magically get paid, his phone bill was always covered, and whenever he found himself in some kind of trouble, they were right there to bail him out, no questions asked. There was the time he wrecked their old minivan and they just shrugged and bought him another used car. Or the time he racked up credit card debt and they drained their savings to pay it off. I, on the other hand, was the responsible one. That sounds like a compliment, but what it really meant was that I was the one they never had to worry about helping. I was just expected to handle my own business, quietly and without complaint. So, the story really starts when I got back home after a long weekend away. It was a much-needed break from work, a little trip I had saved up for months to take. I pulled into my parents' driveway where I always park since my apartment has limited space, and the first thing I noticed was an empty spot. My space. A cold, sinking knot of panic instantly formed in the pit of my stomach. My car is gone. Your mind just races through the worst-case scenarios. Was it towed? Stolen? I ran inside, my heart pounding against my ribs. I burst into the living room and my voice was tight with anxiety when I asked my parents, "Where's my car?" My mom looked up from her book, her expression placid, completely unfazed. "Oh honey, you're back," she said with a little smile. "We gave the car to Kevin. His old one finally died for good this time and he needs a reliable way to get to that new job. Isn't that great?" I just stood there speechless. I couldn't even process the words. She said it so casually, so breezily, like she'd just given him some leftover lasagna from the fridge. My dad chimed in from his armchair, not even looking up from the TV. He was so thrilled. It's a really good car to get him started. They were both smiling. Genuinely, proudly smiling, as if they had just performed the most wonderful charitable act in the world. They had taken my property, the single most valuable thing I owned, the symbol of my sweat and sacrifice, and had just gifted it to my brother without so much as a phone call or a text. That initial shock quickly evaporated and curdled into a white-hot rage I have never felt before in my entire life. It was so intense it felt like a physical force. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "You gave him my car?" I asked, emphasizing every word. "The car that I am still paying a loan on? The one that is registered and titled exclusively in my name?" My dad finally put down his newspaper and waved his hand dismissively. "Don't be so dramatic. It's just a car. Family helps family. You're doing fine for yourself. You can figure something out. Your brother needed it. The condescension, the absolute lack of respect was suffocating. I felt like I was losing my mind. Without another word, I pulled out my phone and called Kevin. He picked up on the second ring and you could practically hear the smug grin in his voice. Hey sis. Hear the good news. Got a sweet new ride. My blood ran cold. I told him, my voice dangerously low, that he had 5 seconds to tell me this was all some kind of sick, elaborate joke. He laughed. He actually laughed. What's the big deal? Mom and Dad said it was fine. They had the spare key, you know. You're successful. You can just get another one. I really need this for my job. That was it. That was the precise moment something in me snapped. The sheer, uncut, breathtaking entitlement. They didn't just take my car. They felt they had a right to it. They saw my hard work, my sacrifices, not as mine, but as some kind of family slush fund they could dip into whenever it suited them to prop up my brother. I turned back to my parents, my voice now shaking with fury. This is not a discussion. You stole my car and I want it back. No. I need Kevin's address so I can go get it. Their response was to double down. My mother told me I was being selfish and ungrateful. Ungrateful? For what? For them giving away my property? My father accused me of not loving my brother. They insisted it was for the best and that I needed to stop making everything so difficult. They were actively blocking me from retrieving my own property. They had backed me into a corner. They took what was mine and were now gaslighting me into feeling guilty for wanting it back. What choice did they possibly leave me? My mind was racing. What do you even do in a situation like this? They wouldn't listen to reason. They wouldn't give me the location of my car. And then a strange sense of clarity washed over me. I started thinking about the legal side of it. And it's actually crystal clear. To gift someone a car, you have to actually own it. You need to hold the lien-free title, sign it over, create a bill of sale, and go through the whole process at the DMV. My parents had done none of that. The title was locked in a safe box in my apartment in my name. The loan from the bank, which I was still paying off, was in my name. Legally, they had no more right to give that car away than a complete stranger on the street. Their gift was a complete and utter fiction. So I did the only thing I could. I left their house, sat in my rental car, and drove to the police station. Walking into that police station was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. I felt weirdly calm, like I was watching myself in a movie. The officer at the front desk was patient and listened quietly while I laid out the entire situation. I didn't get emotional. I didn't scream about my family drama or the years of favoritism. I just stated the facts. My car was taken from my parents' driveway without my permission. I am the sole registered owner and I know who has it. I provided the make, model, VIN, and license plate number. I showed him my registration and insurance documents on my phone. The officer asked the critical question, "Are you willing to press charges?" I looked him right in the eye and without a moment of hesitation I said, yes. Because my car has modern telematics, a GPS tracker for emergencies. It was ridiculously easy for the police to find. Within a couple of hours they had located it. It was parked at an apartment complex in the next town over, right where Kevin was staying with a friend. They ran the plates and, boom, the system flagged it as a stolen vehicle. When Kevin walked out of his apartment the next morning, probably feeling on top of the world as he headed off to that important new job, the police were waiting for him. He was arrested on the spot for grand theft auto. The first phone call I received was from my mother. It wasn't a call. It was a hysterical screech that was so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "How could you do this to your family?" she shrieked. "You're sending your own brother to jail. He's going to have a criminal record. You've ruined his life." There was no acknowledgement of their role, no apology. It was all my fault. Then the texts from my dad started flooding in. I was a disgrace, a monster, and I was dead to him. Like a virus, the news spread through my extended family. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't spoken to in months, all calling and texting to tell me what a horrible person I was, how I'd torn the family apart over a stupid lump of metal. I was officially uninvited from Christmas, future birthdays, everything. In the span of just a few hours, I had been completely excommunicated. I had become the family villain. And this is where the real battle begins, with my entire family declaring war on me to defend my brother in a court of law. If you're enjoying this story, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because you will not believe what happened next. Of course, My parents immediately sprang into action. Not to apologize but to hire a lawyer for Kevin. Their entire defense was built on the flimsy notion that it was all a big misunderstanding, a family gift. They were fully prepared to go to court and testify under oath that they had given Kevin the car. But here's the thing about the law. It doesn't care about your intentions, it cares about the facts. A gift isn't just about what you intend, you have to have the legal authority to give it. You can't give away what you don't own. My case, on the other hand, was brutally simple. I had the title in my name only. I had the loan agreement from the bank which I was still dutifully paying. I had every single receipt for my payments and insurance. It was an open and shut case. Their lawyer, in a move of desperation, even tried to argue that I should be the one charged with a crime for filing a false police report. That threat was terrifying. The idea that I could go to jail for reporting a legitimate theft sent a chill down my spine. But the argument just fell completely flat. To be guilty of filing a false report, you have to have lied with the specific intent to deceive the police. I didn't lie about a single thing. My car was legally mine and it was taken and kept from me against my will. My report wasn't false. It was just the inconvenient truth they didn't want to face. When the district attorney's office reviewed all the evidence, my title, my loan documents, their complete lack of ownership, they saw the situation just as clearly as I did. My brother's lawyer was informed in no uncertain terms that Kevin was facing a serious grand theft auto charge, a felony that could follow him for the rest of his life. Facing a case they had absolutely no chance of winning, the DA offered Kevin a plea deal. If he returned the car immediately, pleaded guilty to a lesser misdemeanor for unauthorized use of a vehicle, completed 100 hours of community service, and attended a court-mandated counseling session, they'd drop the felony charge. My parents were incandescent with fury. Not only had their scheme to get a free car for their golden child failed spectacularly, but now they had to drain their savings on his legal fees, and he would still end up with a criminal record. It was the exact disaster they had tried to avoid. A disaster created entirely by their own arrogance and sense of entitlement. With no other real choice, Kevin took the plea deal. He had to stand up in a courtroom, admit that he was guilty and finally, for once in his life, accept the consequences of his actions without his parents being able to make it all go away. A few days later, the police escorted me to the impound lot to retrieve my car. It was a miserable gray afternoon that matched my mood. The car was filthy, caked in mud and littered with fast food wrappers. There were several new, deep scratches down the passenger side door. Seeing it like that felt like a personal violation. Driving it home was one of the strangest, most conflicting feelings of my life. I felt this surge of victory, of vindication, but it was hollow and bitter. I had won, but what had I really lost? The fallout with my family has been total and absolute. They have completely cut me off. In their version of the story, the one they tell to anyone who will listen, I am the cruel, vindictive villain who chose a material object over her own brother. They completely refused to see the part they played in creating this entire mess. They stole from me, they dismissed my feelings, they lied, and then they had the nerve to be shocked when I used the only tool they left me, the law. People sometimes ask me if it was worth it. And it's a difficult question. In a very real way, I lost my family. But the truth is, maybe the family I thought I had was never really there to begin with. A family that respects you doesn't treat your hard-earned property like a community toy box. A family that loves you doesn't demand that you set yourself on fire just to keep them warm. This was never really about the car. It was about respect. It was about finally drawing a line in the sand and defending myself after a lifetime of being pushed aside and taken for granted. For that reason, I don't regret it. I got my car back, but more importantly, I finally got my self-respect back. So, let's talk about the big question everyone asks. Was I the bad guy for calling the cops on my own brother? Honestly, looking back, what other choice did I have? My parents and my brother created a situation where my only options were to either be a doormat and accept the theft of my own property, or to use the legal system to enforce my rights. When you corner someone, when you systematically ignore their rights, their feelings, and their ownership, you can't act surprised when they finally push back with the only option you've left them. This wasn't just some petty family squabble that got out of hand. It was theft. Plain and simple. But I really want to know what you all think. Was this a matter of righteous justice, or did I go too far and break the family code? Would you have let your family walk all over you for the sake of keeping the peace? Or would you have made that same call to the police? Let me know down in the comments. In the end, I got my property back, but the cost was undeniably huge. A family was torn apart not by a car, but by a deep-seated culture of entitlement and a complete lack of respect. It's a tough and painful lesson that the phrase "family helps family" cannot be a one-way street, and it's certainly not an excuse for taking what isn't yours. The law is pretty clear on this. Ownership is about whose name is on the title. You simply cannot give away things that do not belong to you. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and tell us where you are watching from. My family smiled in public and destroyed me in private. To our neighbors and to everyone at church on Sunday, we were the perfect family. My parents always had these huge, beaming smiles as they greeted people, the kind that just radiated warmth and made others feel instantly welcome. I can still picture my father shaking the pastor's hand, his laughter echoing in the foyer, while my mother organized the coffee service, a portrait of grace and community spirit. But what nobody saw, what no one could even imagine, was that by Sunday night, those smiles would be gone, packed away like decorations after a party. They'd be replaced by a chilling, heavy silence that felt louder than shouting, or by cutting, dismissive words that left me feeling completely and utterly worthless. The contrast was so jarring it felt like living in two different worlds, with two different sets of parents. This is the story of how I learned that the picture-perfect family was just a beautiful, elaborate lie, and how I began the slow, painful process of healing from the kind of damage that no one else could even see. Growing up, my entire childhood felt like an intricately staged performance. Our family portrait was a carefully constructed masterpiece of success and happiness. My dad was a respected figure in our community, the man people turned to for advice. My mom was the tireless volunteer, the one who was always there for everyone else. And I was their crowning achievement, the polite, high-achieving, well-mannered child. We were the family that brought the 7-layer dip to the potluck, the one whose Christmas card, painstakingly shot and selected after hours of forced smiles, was always flawless and arrived first in everyone's mailboxes. I learned my lines pretty early on. It became second nature. I knew exactly how to smile on cue, how to discuss my report card with just the right blend of pride and modesty, and how to expertly dodge any questions from concerned adults that got a little too close to what life was really like behind our polished, dark green front door. This public image was everything to my family. It was more than just a preference. It felt like a sacred, fragile glass sculpture that we all had to hold perfectly still, because the slightest tremor might shatter everything. At school concerts or award nights, my parents would just beam with pride, their hands resting possessively on my shoulders as if to say, "We made this." Neighbors and other parents would tell me how lucky I was, what a blessing it was to have such loving, supportive parents. And honestly, in those fleeting public moments, under the warm glow of approval from the outside world, I almost believed it myself. The applause felt good, but it was a borrowed warmth, a temporary comfort that never ever followed me home. The second that door clicked shut, the performance was over. The stage lights went out, the chill would set in, and my private reality, the one filled with silence and shadows, would begin. What people didn't see was the suffocating, echoing emptiness that filled our house. Behind closed doors, my emotions were treated as an inconvenience, a disruption to the carefully maintained peace. If I cried after a hard day at school, I was being too dramatic. If I expressed anger or frustration, I was being ungrateful for all they provided. My feelings were either completely ignored or actively shut down. It's a concept I later learned was called emotional neglect. It wasn't loud, explosive abuse. It was a quiet, creeping erasure of my inner world, a persistent message that my feelings were wrong or simply didn't matter. I learned that my job was to be happy, or at least pretend to be, so I wouldn't cause any ripples that might disturb the family's placid public image. This created a constant state of cognitive dissonance, a deep-seated confusion that made me feel like I was going crazy. My own reality was always being rewritten by them. An entire evening of tense silence, where my parents communicated only through passive-aggressive sighs and pointed comments, would be completely denied the next morning. "What are you talking about? We had a lovely night," my mom would say, with a look of such genuine confusion that I would start to doubt my own memory. There's a name for that too: gaslighting. And it's an incredibly powerful and insidious tool of emotional abuse. It makes you question your own memory, your own perception, your own sanity. I started to internalize their narrative. I believed the problem wasn't their behavior. It was my flawed perception of it. I thought I was just inherently broken, too sensitive, and just plain wrong for feeling hurt by things they insisted never happened. It all shattered into a million irreparable pieces on the night of my high school graduation. To the outside world, it was the triumphant climax of our family's success story. My parents were the very picture of pride, posing for endless photos, graciously accepting congratulations on my scholarship to a good university. I had played my part perfectly, smiling until my cheeks ached, hugging relatives and expressing my profound gratitude. But later that night at home, after the applause had faded and the stage was empty, a tiny disagreement over my plans for the summer, I wanted to take a road trip with my friends before college, just exploded. The mask didn't just slip, it was obliterated. All the unspoken resentment, the years of controlled anger, and the bitter disappointment came pouring out. The argument wasn't really about my summer plans, of course. It was about control. It was about all the subtle ways I had apparently failed to live up to their unspoken, ever-shifting expectations. The words they used that night were surgical. They took my deepest insecurities, things I had only confessed to them in rare moments when I felt safe and vulnerable, and they turned them into weapons. I was told my scholarship was just a fluke, that I wasn't nearly as smart as my teachers thought. I was told that my friends secretly felt sorry for me, that I was a social disappointment. Every word was meticulously designed to tear down any sense of self-worth I had managed to build for myself. I remember just sitting on my bedroom floor that night, the wood cold against my skin, their voices still ringing in my ears. And in the middle of all that searing pain, I felt a strange and sudden sense of clarity. It was as if two tectonic plates that had been grinding against each other for years finally shifted. The two realities, the smiling, perfect family in public and the cruel, invalidating one in private, they just couldn't exist together in my head anymore. The lie was too big. The dissonance was too painful to keep ignoring. And for the first time, with a certainty that was as devastating as it was liberating, I understood that the problem wasn't me. It was them. And that realization, as crushing as it was also the first tiny spark of wanting to find my way out of the darkness. The weeks following graduation were a disorienting blur of depression and suffocating anxiety. The worthlessness I felt was bone deep, a hollow ache in my chest that never went away. My parents' critical voices had become my own inner critic, a relentless, cruel narrator in my head pointing out every single one of my flaws, replaying every mistake, echoing every insult. I struggled to get out of bed. The scholarship I had been so proud of felt like a fraud. I felt completely and utterly alone, trapped in a reality no one else could see. And who could I possibly tell? If I spoke up, I'd be betraying the family's #1 unspoken rule. What happens in this house stays in this house. The shame was a physical weight pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I knew with a certainty that scared me that I couldn't keep living like that. The pain was just too much, too all-consuming. With my hands literally shaking, I sat down at my computer and searched for therapists in my area. The act of typing those words felt like a monumental betrayal. Making that first appointment was one of the hardest things I have ever done. It felt like a public admission that I had failed, like I was proving them right, that I really was the broken one, the source of the problem. But a bigger, quieter part of me knew it was an act of survival. Walking into that first therapy session, my heart pounding in my chest, I was terrified. But for the first time in my entire life, I felt a little flicker of hope that I was finally taking a step that was just for me and for me alone. Therapy was the first place I didn't have to perform. My therapist, a woman with a calm and gentle presence, just listened. She didn't interrupt, she didn't judge, she just listened as I stumbled and hesitated, trying to describe the crazy-making contradiction of my family life. And then she gave me words from my experience. Words like hidden family trauma, emotional invalidation, and covert abuse. Hearing these terms was a profound revelation. It was like someone had finally handed me a map to the confusing, painful, and lonely place I'd been wandering in my whole life. My experiences were real, they had names, and most importantly, I wasn't alone in them. She explained that families who are obsessed with maintaining a perfect public image often create a particularly isolating kind of trauma. The constant need to uphold a facade leaves you feeling perpetually confused and makes you believe your own reality isn't real. She explained that emotional invalidation is the act of rejecting or dismissing someone's feelings, which sends the message that your inner world is wrong. For the first time, I felt truly seen. I learned that my deep-seated feelings of worthlessness weren't because I was inherently flawed, They were a completely normal response to a completely abnormal and unhealthy environment. Therapy became my one safe place to feel validated, and it was the very beginning of learning how to untangle who I was from the web of their dysfunction. My healing journey was not a straight line. It was a messy, winding path with breakthroughs and setbacks. It took a lot of dedicated and often painful work. My therapist introduced me to something called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. She explained that CBT could help me identify, challenge, and reframe the automatic negative thoughts that had become second nature to me after years of criticism. For my entire life, my inner voice was a carbon copy of my parents, always whispering, "You're not good enough," or "You're a burden." CBT taught me how to become a detective in my own mind. I learned to stop, identify a thought like, "I'm going to fail this exam," and question it. I'd ask, what is the evidence for that thought? What have I done to prepare? What's a more balanced perspective? Slowly, painstakingly, I started taking apart the case my inner critic had built against me. We also worked with a different approach called narrative therapy. This type of therapy helped me see my life as a story. For so long, the story I told myself was that I was the flawed, problematic character in a perfect family. Narrative therapy gave me the power to become the author of my own story, not just a minor character in theirs. I started to reframe what happened to me, not as events that defined my character but as challenges I had survived. We would take a specific memory like a family dinner where a small mistake of mine led to a week of silent treatment and rewrite it. The old story was, I ruined everything. The new story became, I was a child navigating a difficult environment and I showed resilience. That shift was monumental. It allowed me to see my story as one of strength and survival, instead of one of shame and inadequacy. Childhood emotional trauma can completely hollow out your sense of self-worth. I had spent my entire life trying to earn my worth through achievements, good grades, awards, compliments, desperately hoping that if I was perfect enough I would finally be worthy of their love. My therapist helped me understand the radical idea that self-worth is inherent. It's not something you have to prove or earn. But knowing that in your head and feeling it in your heart are two very different things. Rebuilding my self-worth was an active, conscious process, like building a house brick by painful brick. I started small, with practices that felt foreign and almost selfish at first. I learned to practice self-compassion, to give myself the same kindness and understanding I would easily give to a friend. When that inner critic got loud, screaming, "You are a failure," I learned to respond with a quiet but firm, "You are trying your best and that is enough." I started a journal where I forced myself to list my strengths and accomplishments, however small, forcing my brain to see the good things I had always brushed off as insignificant. I started taking myself out on dates, to a coffee shop, a museum, a park, and learned to ask myself a question I had never been encouraged to even consider. What do I want to do? Each small act, each moment of self-kindness, was another brick in my new foundation, a quiet little declaration that I mattered just because I existed. Perhaps the hardest and ultimately most empowering part of my healing was learning to set boundaries. Boundaries are essentially the rules you set to protect your own mental and emotional peace, but in my family they were non-existent. My needs were secondary to the family's image. Saying no to anything felt like declaring war. My first attempt was small, but it felt like climbing a mountain. I calmly said no to a last-minute command performance holiday visit, explaining that I already had other plans. The pushback was immediate and intense. Guilt trips, accusations that I was being selfish, that I didn't care about the family. The old me, the conditioned people pleaser, was screaming inside my head to just give in, apologize, and make things okay again. But with my therapist's voice in my ear, I held firm. And while it was terrifying in the moment, something amazing happened after I hung up the phone. A profound sense of relief. I had honored my own needs, maybe for the very first time in my life. I learned that setting a boundary isn't about being cold or ungrateful. It's a necessary act of self-respect. It's about teaching people how you expect to be treated. For anyone who has survived hidden abuse, setting boundaries isn't an act of aggression. It's an act of profound self-preservation. It is drawing a line in the sand and saying, my well-being starts here. My journey is far from over, and some days are much harder than others, but it's finally my own journey. If this story sounds achingly familiar, if you've ever felt that dizzying gap between a public smile and private pain, please know you are not alone. Healing from this kind of invisible trauma is possible. I want to encourage you to share a part of your story in the comments, but only if you feel safe and ready to do so. Reading each other's experiences, knowing we are not isolated in this, can help all of us feel a little less alone. And if you're struggling, if you feel trapped, please consider the brave step of reaching out to a therapist or a mental health professional. It can be a life-changing first step toward taking your own life back. Spent years of my life pretending, holding up a polished family image that was slowly but surely crushing me. Today I'm no longer performing. I'm living. The healing process has been about unlearning all the insidious lies I was taught about my own worth and slowly, patiently, learning to trust myself. It's about accepting the painful truth that I can't change my family, but I can change how much power I allow them to have over me. The goal isn't to forget the past but to integrate it into a new story. A story where I am worthy of love and respect simply because I exist. My pain, once a source of deep shame, has become my purpose. And for the first time when I smile, it is quiet, it is real, and it is truly my own. Remember to hit that subscribe button, share, like, and drop your comment. My dad laughed when I lost my job, then he became my client. The day I lost my job, the day my entire professional world collapsed, my own father laughed in my face. He didn't just chuckle. He leaned back in his chair and let out a deep, booming laugh that echoed with years of "I told you so's." He told me my career was a joke that had finally run its course, that I never had what it takes to make it in the real world. He wasn't just doubting me, he was actively celebrating my failure. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly comprehend in his moment of triumph, was that he wasn't closing the book on my story. He was just forcefully writing the first sentence of a brand new chapter. The chapter where he, the man who built his life on concrete and steel, would have to come to me, his failure of a son, and ask me to save his legacy. My dad and I have always been inhabitants of two completely different planets. He is a man forged by labor, a testament to what you can build with calloused hands and unwavering grit. He started his construction business, Miller & Sons Concrete, with a used pickup truck and a toolbox. He built it into a small but deeply respected local company, a business where deals were sealed with a firm handshake and a man's word was his bond. His world smelled of sawdust and wet concrete. It was tangible. It was, in his words, real. My world was pixels and data streams. I was a senior digital marketing strategist for a rapidly growing tech firm. My language was filled with terms like brand synergy, multi-channel funnels, and search engine optimization. To my father, this was all just a cloud of incomprehensible jargon. It was voodoo, a fancy way of saying I played on the computer for a living. He never, ever missed an opportunity to remind me of this fact. Family barbecues were my personal crucible. He'd sling his arm around my shoulder a little too heavily and announce to his work buddies, "This here's my son Mark. He clicks things for a living." The ensuing laughter from his friends, men with dirt under their fingernails and sun-weathered faces, always felt like a punch to the gut. I just have to stand there and force a smile, my cheeks burning with a familiar shame. My entire career, the path I had chosen and worked so hard for, was nothing more than a running joke to him. It wasn't a real job. You couldn't hold its results in your hand, so it simply didn't count. Despite this, I poured every ounce of myself into that job. And I was good at it. Damn good. I thrived on the intellectual challenge, the intricate dance of strategy, the absolute thrill of watching a complex campaign ignite and exceed all expectations. I was the guy who voluntarily worked through weekends to perfect a presentation, the one who stayed late to analyze a sudden dip in traffic. I sacrificed birthdays, missed anniversaries, and let friendships wither, all in the relentless pursuit of climbing a corporate ladder my own father didn't even believe existed. Deep down, I knew what I was chasing. It wasn't just a promotion or a bigger salary. I was chasing his respect, running myself into the ground for a single nod of approval that never came. The end arrived on a bleak, gray Tuesday. The process was as cold and impersonal as the glass walls of the office I used to love. It was a brutally efficient 15-minute video call with an HR representative I'd never met and a VP of something or other whose face was a blank mask. They deployed an arsenal of corporate speak like restructuring, synergistic realignment, and strategic downsizing. But all I heard, the only message that broke through the static, was "You're done." They assured me it wasn't personal, but as I walked through the lobby holding a sad brown cardboard box filled with my desk plant and a coffee mug, my deactivated access card heavy in my pocket, it felt intensely personal. The company I had given my life to for 6 years had just deleted me with a calendar invite. I drove home in a silent, thick daze. The city felt muffled like I was underwater. That cardboard box sat in the passenger seat next to me, a silent, mocking tombstone for my career. The thought of telling my friends was daunting, but the real dread, the cold, heavy knot in my stomach, was the thought of telling my dad. I let myself into my parents' house and found him at the kitchen table, hunched over a set of blueprints, the way he'd been for as long as I could remember. He looked up, his eyes immediately locking onto the box in my hands. A slow, knowing smirk crept across his face and my heart sank. I didn't even need to speak. He already knew and he was savoring it. Well, he began, leaning back in his chair with a theatrical creak. Looks like the real world finally came knocking on the door of your little digital world. I just stood there by the door, mute, the box feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I told you, didn't I? He continued, his voice rising with a triumphant, dismissive energy I knew all too well. I warned you all that computer nonsense wasn't a real career. It was a bubble, a fantasy, and it finally popped. And then he laughed. It wasn't a small chuckle. It was a deep, hearty belly laugh, a sound filled with years of pent-up vindication. He was laughing at my failure, at the raw, gaping wound of my humiliation. He didn't see a son in pain. He saw a debate he had finally won. In that moment he wasn't my father. He was just a critic, and he was ecstatic that the show had been a flop. The weeks that followed were a monotonous gray blur. My dad's laughter became the soundtrack to my life, an echo that bounced around the suffocating silence of my now empty apartment. My mornings, once a frantic rush of coffee, emails, and purpose, were now vast, empty deserts of time. I'd wake up whenever, stare at the ceiling, and feel the crushing weight of having absolutely nothing to do and nowhere to be. Self-doubt wasn't just a thought. It was a constant companion, a roommate who whispered in my ear that my dad was right all along. Maybe I was a fraud. Maybe my entire career had been a sophisticated illusion. Then the digital avalanche of rejections began. The phrase, "Thank you for your interest, but we've decided to move forward with other candidates," became a daily ritual of humiliation. Each email was a small, sharp jab, and with every "no," my dad's mocking voice grew louder in my head. I became desperate. I started applying for everything and anything. Senior roles I was now supposedly underqualified for, junior roles I was embarrassingly overqualified for. It didn't matter. The response was always the same. Crickets or another polite rejection. It felt like the entire industry I had dedicated my life to had collectively decided I no longer existed. The bills, of course, kept coming. Each envelope with a window on it felt like a threat, a bright white reminder that my savings were hemorrhaging. The confident, articulate strategist was gone, replaced by a man who felt a jolt of anxiety every time he heard the mail slot clang shut. I started screening my dad's calls, sending him straight to voicemail. I just couldn't bear to hear that smug, satisfied tone and answer the inevitable condescending question, "Found a real job yet?" I was at the absolute bottom, living in the wreckage of a life I thought I had meticulously built, and the one man who should have offered a hand was standing back, convinced I deserved to be there. I was submerged in that pit of despair for nearly 3 months. My days had no shape, just a cycle of waking up late, aimlessly scrolling and feeling sorry for myself. Then one afternoon I got a call out of the blue. It was a friend of a friend, a woman named Sarah who ran a local bakery. She was in a full-blown panic. Her online ordering system was a disaster, her social media was a ghost town, and her business, her dream, was teetering on the edge of failure. She'd heard through the grapevine that I was good with that computer stuff, and begged me to just take a look. She was upfront that she couldn't pay much, maybe a couple $100 for my time. My pride bristled. Felt like a handout, a charity case. But the truth was, the silence in my apartment was becoming deafening, and I desperately needed the money. So I said yes. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, as I opened my laptop and started digging into her business, I felt a familiar flicker of the old me. I dove into her website's analytics, diagnosed the clunky user interface that was causing people to abandon their carts, and sketched out a simple hyper-targeted ad campaign focused on her local zip code. I worked for 2 weeks straight, powered by cheap instant coffee and a desperate burning need to prove to myself that I could still do something useful. At the end of the second week, Sarah called me, her voice so full of excitement she was practically shouting. Her online orders had more than tripled. New customers were walking in every day holding up their phones and saying, "I saw your ad for the salted caramel croissants." It was the first tangible win, the first piece of positive news since the day I was fired. And as I looked at the numbers, at the real measurable impact my computer nonsense had on her small business, a powerful thought struck me. My old company, with its billions in revenue, saw me as a disposable line item on a spreadsheet. But for Sarah's Bakery, I wasn't a line item. I was a lifeline. That was it. That was the spark that reignited everything. I had a sudden crystal-clear realization. There were thousands of businesses just like Sarah's. Businesses run by passionate, talented people. People like my dad. People who were masters of their craft but were complete novices in the digital world. They didn't need some massive, faceless marketing agency from the city that charged a fortune. They needed someone who could speak their language, understand their struggles, and deliver results they could see in their cash register. That day I stopped looking for jobs. I decided I was going to create my own. I started with almost nothing. A second-hand laptop, a cheap, self-made website, and that one bakery success story to my name. I called my new one-man consultancy Apex Digital, a name that felt laughably ambitious for a business being run from a corner of my cramped apartment. The first 6 months were a brutal, relentless grind. I became a marketing mercenary, taking any client who would have me. I worked for a plumber who needed more emergency calls, a small clothing boutique struggling to sell online, and a family-owned restaurant that wanted to increase dinner reservations. My fees were so low it was almost embarrassing, but I wasn't just working for money. I was building a portfolio. I was collecting proof. I was pulling 18-hour days every day. My life became an exhausting, exhilarating cycle of cold calling potential clients, deep diving into analytics, and late-night strategy sessions fueled by the fear of failure. I became obsessed with self-improvement. I taught myself advanced SEO techniques, got new certifications in Google and Facebook advertising, and devoured every book on business development and marketing I could get my hands on. There was a hunger in me I'd never felt before at my corporate job, a raging fire that had been lit by the gasoline of my father's laughter. Every new client signed, every successful campaign launched, was a silent, defiant answer to his mockery. And slowly, painstakingly, it started to work. Word of mouth, the very currency my father understood, began to spread. The plumber told his electrician friend how his phone was now ringing off the hook. The restaurant owner raved to her suppliers about how her tables were full every weekend. I started getting calls from people I didn't know who had heard I was the guy who gets results. I raised my rates. Then I raised them again. I finally moved out of my apartment and into a small, clean 2-room office downtown. I hired my first freelance contractor to help with the workload. Apex Digital was becoming a real business, a legitimate enterprise built not on fancy jargon, but on the one thing my father always claimed to respect above all else: tangible, undeniable results. I wasn't just clicking things anymore. I was building an empire, one grateful client at a time. It was almost 2 years to the day after I was fired. I was in my office, whiteboarding a complex strategy for a new high-paying client, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I answered professionally. "Apex Digital, Mark speaking." The voice on the other end was gruff, frustrated, and older. He started talking immediately, explaining that his construction business was in serious trouble. He said younger, more tech-savvy companies were underbidding him and winning all the contracts. His old-school methods of relying on a good name and word of mouth weren't cutting it anymore. He said a mutual acquaintance, a supplier we both used, couldn't stop praising the work I'd done for him. He needed help. He needed a marketing expert. It took me a long second to place the voice. The usual booming confidence was gone, replaced by a thin veil of desperation. But there was no mistaking it. It was my father. I leaned back in my chair and just let him talk. For nearly 10 minutes he laid out all of his company's problems, all its failures and fears, never once using my name. He was just a desperate business owner talking to the consultant he'd been told could work miracles. He had absolutely no idea he was confessing his professional failures to his own son. When he finally ran out of steam, there was a long, heavy pause on the line. I let it hang in the air. Then I spoke, my voice perfectly calm and professional. "Hey," I said. "It sounds like you have a significant lead generation problem, and your brand's online presence is close to zero. We can definitely help with that." The silence that followed was the most profound I have ever experienced. It was deafening. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head, processing my voice, the name of my company, the crushing biblical irony of the situation. Mark? He finally stammered, the name sounding foreign and choked. Yes, Dad, I replied, keeping my tone perfectly level, betraying none of the swirling emotions inside me. It's me. More silence. In that quiet moment, I felt the entire power dynamic of our relationship, a dynamic that had been set in stone for 30 years, crack, shift, and then shatter completely. The man who had laughed at my career was now, hat in hand, asking me to save his. He was no longer the all-knowing father talking down to his disappointing son. He was a struggling business owner talking to an expert whose help he desperately needed. I let him sit in that uncomfortable, deafening quiet for a few more seconds. My consultation fee is $200 an hour, I said clearly and without emotion. My project retainers start at $5,000 a month, with a 6-month minimum commitment. If you're serious about fixing your business, I can have my assistant send over a contract. You can look it over and decide if my services are worth it. He was utterly speechless. For the first time in my entire life, I was the one in control. The one setting the terms. So what do you think? Was I too harsh? Did I let my anger get the best of me, or did he get exactly what was coming to him? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The signed contract appeared in my inbox the next morning. There was no grand apology, no emotional phone call. Just a sterile PDF and a wire transfer confirmation for the first month's retainer. Business. Our first official meeting was held at my office. Not his dusty trailer on a job site. Not the family kitchen table. My turf. He walked in looking 10 years older and a foot shorter than I'd ever seen him. He seemed completely out of place among the modern furniture, the glass whiteboards covered in flow charts, and the quiet hum of my small team at work. I treated him exactly like any other new client, professionally, directly, and with a focus on cold, hard data. I put his company's non-existent online footprint up on the big screen, showing him charts of the search traffic his competitors were capturing. I walked him through a 6-month strategy, using all the jargon he used to make fun of. Funnels, keywords, cost per click, conversion rates. This time he didn't scoff. He listened. He nodded along, his brow furrowed in concentration. He didn't understand all of it, not even close, but he understood the bottom line. He understood he was losing and I was showing him how to win. Over the next few months, Apex Digital completely overhauled his business. We built him a sleek, professional website that showcased his best work. We launched targeted ad campaigns on Google and Facebook aimed at local homeowners and developers. We implemented a system to track every lead, to follow up, to convert interest into contracts. Slowly at first, and then like a floodgate opening, his phone started ringing again. He started winning bids for jobs he would have lost just months earlier. His business, which had been slowly bleeding out, came roaring back to life. He never explicitly said, "Thank you for saving my company." He never uttered the words, "I'm sorry I laughed at you." That just wasn't his way. But he showed his respect in new, unfamiliar ways. He'd call with a legitimate question about an ad campaign and actually listen to my answer without interrupting. He stopped calling my job computer nonsense, and started referring to it as the marketing. One afternoon he stopped by the office unannounced to drop off a check. I was in the middle of a conference call with a major client in another state. He didn't interrupt. He just stood by the door and watched me, listening to me speak with authority and confidence. When I hung up, he looked at me and there was a completely new expression in his eyes. It wasn't quite pride, not yet. It was something closer to awe. "You're really good at this," he said quietly. Then he just nodded, turned and left. Coming from him, it was more than I had ever hoped for. We worked together for about a year before his business was back on solid, stable ground and he had a steady stream of work lined up. Our personal relationship is, well, it's a work in progress. The holidays are still a bit awkward, but the mockery is gone for good. In its place is a quiet, almost grudging respect. He's not my client anymore, but more importantly, he's no longer my biggest critic. He's just my dad. Looking back, the day I lost my job, the moment I thought my life was over, was unequivocally the best thing that ever happened to me. The sting of my father's laughter wasn't an end point. It was the fuel I needed to ignite my own ambition. That corporate rejection forced me to stop begging for a seat at someone else's table and gave me the motivation to build my own. So if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been mocked or dismissed by the very people who should have been in your corner, please do not let their doubt become your reality. Sometimes what feels like the worst day of your life is really just day one of the greatest story you could ever imagine. Let your success be the only and the loudest reply you ever need to give. Hit that subscribe button, share, comment your thought, and tell us where you are watching from. They said I'd always need them, so I let them panic. They said I'd always need them. That without their guidance, their help, their constant suffocating intervention, I would be completely and utterly lost. A ship without a rudder, a story without a plot. They painted a picture of me as fragile, incapable, and perpetually in need of rescue. So I decided to test that theory. I didn't argue, I didn't raise my voice. I simply let them panic. This is the story of how I won my freedom, reclaimed my own mind, and proved them wrong without saying a single word. For as long as I can remember, my family's love felt a lot like being smothered. It wasn't the loud, aggressive kind of control that leaves visible bruises. It was worse. It was the soft, sneaky kind, all wrapped up in the language of care and what's best for you. It was a gilded cage, comfortable and beautifully decorated, but a cage nonetheless. "Oh, don't you worry your pretty little head about that," my mother would say, her voice a soothing melody as she plucked a bill right out of my hand. "We'll handle the finances. It's just so complicated and you have so much else on your plate." She wasn't just paying a bill. She was reinforcing the narrative that I was financially illiterate, that numbers were a mystical language only she and my father could decipher. Any attempt I made to learn was met with a dismissive wave. "It's all taken care of, sweetheart. It's our job to worry about these things." My older brother, their appointed enforcer, was just the same, but his brand of help was more physical. "You're not a great driver, let me just take you," he'd insist, dangling his car keys like a prize. This wasn't just for long trips. This was for a 5-minute drive to the corner store, a trip to the gym, a visit to a friend's house. Every time I got behind the wheel, he'd find a reason to critique my parking, my speed, my choice of route. "It's safer this way," he'd conclude, and the unspoken part was always, safer from your own incompetence. My life was just one gentle takeover after another. They'd schedule my dentist appointments because they knew my schedule better than I did, which was their way of saying my time wasn't really my own. They'd help with my job applications by rewriting my cover letters, subtly nudging me toward jobs they thought were appropriate. Usually something stable, local, and completely unthreatening. A role that would keep me physically close and professionally dependent. When I once showed interest in a creative field, they collectively sighed with concern, talking about instability and the lack of a clear career path, until my own excitement felt foolish and naive. Every single decision, from the car I should buy, something sensible, pre-approved by my father, to what I should have for dinner, "We're making lasagna, you love lasagna," which was a statement, not a question, became a group discussion where my vote was just a suggestion, easily overruled for my own good. Their family motto, and I heard it so often it became a dull ringing in my ears, was, "You'd be lost without us." They didn't say it with malice. They said it with this smug, self-satisfied certainty that was way more infuriating. They'd built this whole story where I was the helpless main character, the damsel perpetually tied to the train tracks of life, and they were the heroes, a family of saviors always swooping in to save me from myself. And for years the most insidious part is that a part of me believed them. Their constant help wasn't just managing my life. It was a masterclass in slowly chipping away at my confidence. Every time they stepped in, it just hammered home the idea that I was incapable. I started second-guessing every move I made. I'd stand in a grocery store, paralyzed over which brand of pasta to buy, wondering what they would choose. I'd rehearse simple phone calls in my head, terrified of saying the wrong thing without their guidance. Their voices became my inner monologue, a chorus of doubt. The cage was comfortable, I'll give them that. I never had to worry about late fees, confusing paperwork, or the stress of navigating complex adult responsibilities. But that comfort was a sedative. It was still a cage, and through the slowly lifting fog of their influence, I was finally starting to see the bars. The breaking point wasn't some big dramatic explosion. It wasn't a screaming match in the living room. It was a quiet, soul-crushing Tuesday that felt like any other, but ended with a profound and irreversible shift inside of me. I'd been working my tail off for a promotion at my job. It wasn't just a step up, it was a step out. The role involved managing a new regional project, which meant travel. Real travel. It meant flights, hotels, navigating new cities and leading a team on my own terms. It was the first thing in years that I had wanted entirely for myself, untainted by their opinions or suggestions. I prepped for weeks, spending my evenings and weekends poring over market data, building a detailed proposal and practicing my presentation until the words felt like they were my own. My boss was genuinely impressed. I saw it in his eyes during our meetings. He wasn't just placating me, he was engaging with my ideas. For the first time I felt this bright, sharp spark of real, unassisted pride. The final interview was a formality he'd hinted. It was set for that Friday. I felt like I was on the edge of a new life. Then on Tuesday evening my father sat me down in the living room. "I had a chat with your boss," he said, stirring his coffee with the casual air of someone discussing the weather. My blood ran cold. He didn't look up. Just a friendly word. "I know his brother-in-law, we play golf sometimes. I told him you're a dedicated worker, a real asset to the company, but that all that travel might be a bit too much for you to handle right now. The stress, the logistics, it's a lot. I suggested they think about you for a different role, one with more stability here at home. Something to let you grow without getting overwhelmed." He looked up at me and was beaming like he'd just handed me the keys to a kingdom he had built for me. He genuinely thought he'd done a good thing. He saw my ambition not as a strength, but as a problem he needed to solve, a risk he had to neutralize for my own protection. He couldn't stand the idea of me succeeding on a stage he couldn't see, couldn't manage, couldn't control. My boss called the next day. His voice was different, distant, formal. The travel role, he explained, had been re-evaluated. They decided to go with a candidate who had more logistical experience. He'd keep me in mind for something else. That little spark I'd felt just days before? It was extinguished. Stamped out. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't even tremble. I just looked at my father later that evening, so proud of his meddling, so content in his role as my protector, and in that moment, everything became crystal clear. They didn't want me to be safe. They wanted me to be dependent. Their help wasn't a safety net. It was an anchor, and it was chained to my ankle. And I realized then and there I would never win by arguing with them. You can't reason with people whose entire worldview depends on you being wrong. The only way to win was to prove them wrong silently and completely. The game had to change, and I was about to rewrite the rules. My plan was devastatingly simple. I'd become a ghost in my own life. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't write a dramatic letter. I didn't make a Declaration of Independence. I just stopped. I stopped engaging. I stopped explaining. I stopped giving them the fuel of information they needed to run my life. The next morning the usual routine kicked off. "I laid out your blue shirt for you, it looks better for your Wednesday meetings," my mother called out from the hallway. I walked out of my room wearing a black one. No thank you, no argument. I just grabbed my keys, picked up my coffee and left for work. The silence had begun. The questions started that evening. "Did you remember to call the insurance company about that rate increase?" my brother asked, already reaching for his phone to do it for me, the hero ready to swoop in. "It's handled," I said, not looking up from my book. His hand paused. His brow furrowed. "What do you mean, it's handled? What did they say? Did you get the reference number?" he pushed, trying to find a crack in my composure. "It's handled," I repeated, turning a page. Calm as a frozen lake. Those two words became my shield and my sword. The next few weeks were a masterclass in quiet defiance. "We need to sit down and do your taxes this weekend. It's that time of year again." "It's handled." "Your car's making that noise again, let me call my guy. I'll take it in for you on Saturday. It's scheduled with a new mechanic. Don't forget you have that family dinner with the cousins on Saturday." "I have other plans." "What plans?" "Plans." I was a black hole of information. I gave them no details, no drama, no explanations, and most importantly, no openings for them to help. Every evening I'd come home from work, make myself a simple dinner and retreat to my room. I wasn't rude. I wasn't aggressive. I was just a pleasant, smiling, unmovable brick wall. Meanwhile, behind my closed bedroom door, I was living a frantic, secret second life. I was glued to my laptop, a student in the University of Google and YouTube. I was teaching myself how to create a budget spreadsheet, my heart pounding with a strange mix of fear and excitement. I watched hours of tutorials on basic car maintenance, learning the difference between a dipstick and a tire iron. I spent my lunch breaks researching apartments across town, comparing lease terms and utility costs. I secretly opened my own bank account online. A simple act that felt like a revolution. I set up a direct deposit for a portion of my paycheck, a secret fund for my freedom. I applied for and got a credit card in my own name, the plastic feeling impossibly heavy and significant in my hand. Step by step, brick by brick, I was building my own life in the shadows of the one they thought they still controlled. They saw a daughter who was being quiet and moody. In reality, I was a prisoner of war, silently digging an escape tunnel with a teaspoon. Their first reaction was confusion, which quickly curdled into irritation. My quiet competence was a wrench in their well-oiled machine of codependence. My refusal to be helped wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a deep, personal insult. It was a rejection of their very identity as the family saviors. "I just don't understand this new attitude," my mother would say, her voice tight with a frustration she was trying to disguise as concern. "We're just trying to help you. Why are you being so difficult?" To them, my independence was difficult. My self-sufficiency was an attitude. My silence was an act of aggression. Then when irritation didn't work, they moved on to manufactured crises. This was their last desperate play to force me back into the damsel in distress role they needed me to play. One week, the internet, which was in my father's name, was suddenly shut off for non-payment. He came to me with a deeply sympathetic look, a performance worthy of an award. "Oh dear, looks like I forgot to pay the bill. You must be in a complete panic with your work deadlines. Don't you worry, I'll call them right now and sort it out for you." He was poised, waiting for me to crumble and say, "Oh, thank you, Dad. What would I do without you?" "Dad," I just shrugged. "No need. I signed up for my own service last week. The technician is coming tomorrow morning to install it." The look on his face was a masterpiece of stunned disbelief. It was the face of a puppet master who just discovered his favorite puppet had found a pair of scissors and cut its own strings. He had no power. That's when the simple irritation morphed into genuine panic. They started talking in hushed tones whenever I entered a room, the conversation instantly ceasing. They'd try to bait me into arguments, poking at old insecurities, trying to get any kind of emotional reaction out of me. "You seem tired," my mother would say. "Are you sure you're eating enough? You look thin." My brother would try a different angle. "Heard from Sarah lately? He was asking about you. I told her you've been a bit off." They needed to know what was going on in my head. My silence was a void they were trying to fill with their own anxieties, and it was driving them crazy. They had spent my entire life telling me I couldn't survive without them, but as I calmly handled every challenge they either observed or secretly created, it was becoming terrifyingly clear that the opposite was true. Their entire sense of purpose, their family dynamic, was built on me being helpless. And I wasn't helpless anymore. Before I tell you how this all finally came to a head, I have to ask, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments what your breaking point would have been. And if you're finding this story as satisfying as I did, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because the moment they finally understood the truth is worth sticking around for. The endgame came about a month into my silent rebellion. It was a Friday. I had just picked up the keys to my new apartment. Holding them in my hand, I felt a tremor of pure, unadulterated freedom. Over the past few weeks, I had been moving things in small, clandestine trips. A box of books here, a new set of dishes there, a bag of clothes. My new place was slowly becoming a home while my old room was becoming a shell. I came back to the house that evening for my last few boxes of personal belongings. As soon as I walked in, I knew. The air was thick with tension. The entire family was waiting for me in the living room, arranged like a tribunal. It was an intervention. "We need to talk," my father said, his voice trembling with a potent cocktail of anger and fear. "We don't know who you are anymore. You've been sneaking around, lying to us, shutting us out. After everything we have done for you, this is how you repay us? What is going on?" My mother chimed in, her voice pleading. "We're your family. We love you. Why won't you let us in? We just want to help you." For the first time in a month, I dropped the "it's handled" defense. I stood before them and I looked at each of them in turn. My father, the master planner. My mother, the gentle enabler. My brother, the dutiful enforcer. And I spoke with a calm I had never known I possessed. "You're right," I began, my voice even and clear. "You don't know who I am. You never did. You knew the person you wanted me to be. The person you needed me to be. The person who would be lost without you. I paused, letting that hang in the air, letting them really hear it. For the last month I've been living my own life. I got my own bank account and built a budget. I've been paying my own bills on time. I found a mechanic who doesn't talk down to me, and I learned how to check my own oil. I taught myself how to understand a lease. I did it all without your help. Not because I wanted to hurt you, but because I had to prove to myself that I could. Then I delivered the final quiet blow. You said I'd always need you, I said, my voice perfectly steady, holding my new keys up just enough for the light to catch them. You were wrong. I signed a lease on a new apartment. I'm moving out. Tonight. Silence. Complete deafening silence. The panic on their faces was gone, replaced by a hollow, profound shock. It wasn't that I was leaving that stunned them. It was how I did it. I hadn't asked for permission. I hadn't asked for help moving. I hadn't needed a cosigner for the lease or a loan for the deposit. I had pulled off a flawless escape right under their noses, using the very incompetence they projected onto me as the perfect camouflage. They were so busy watching for me to stumble that they never saw me run. I had won. Not by yelling or fighting, but by quietly refusing to play their game anymore. I turned, picked up my last box of belongings, walked to the front door, and for the first time in my life I closed it behind me, knowing I was the only one who held the key. That first night in my own apartment, the silence was different. It wasn't the tense, weaponized silence from my family's home. It was peaceful. It was the sound of freedom. It was the hum of a refrigerator that I had bought. It was the absence of footsteps outside my door, of voices just checking in. It was the sound of my own thoughts, clear and uninterrupted for the first time. This story isn't really about revenge. It's about taking back your own narrative. They wrote a story for me where I was a helpless side character, and I decided to become the author of my own. Sometimes, the most powerful move you can make is to go silent and let people show you who they really are when they can't control you anymore. Their panic revealed the truth. They thought I needed them, but it turns out they were the ones who desperately needed me to be helpless. Their sense of purpose was tied to my perceived weakness. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to pull off a silent rebellion to get your independence back? Share your stories in the comments below. I read as many as I can, and your experiences give strength to so many other people who might be feeling trapped in their own gilded cage. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories of quiet rebellion and sweet, sweet justice. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Share this story and tell us where you are watching from. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most powerful. Disinherited on his deathbed, I didn't have a son. What do you do when the man who gave you everything takes it all away with his last breath? For 30 years I was Julian Vance, the sole heir to the Vance industrial fortune. My destiny was forged in steel and spelled out in billion-dollar contracts. I admit I was the worst kind of spoiled. My life was a blur of fast cars I didn't own, beautiful women I didn't know, and a sense of entitlement as vast as our corporate holdings. I was the Prince Regent, and I was just waiting for the old king to die. I thought his death would be my coronation. Instead, his final words, "I don't have a son," were my execution. He didn't just leave me with nothing. He left me with a single burning question that would unravel a 30-year-long lie and expose a secret that had been hiding in plain sight all along. The heart monitor in room 3B beeped a slow, tired, metronomic rhythm. For 3 days, it was the only sound in the sterile white room besides the whisper of the ventilation and my own impatient breathing. It was a sound that was starting to feel less like a measure of life and more like a countdown timer for mine to finally begin. My father, Arthur Vance, a man who once commanded boardrooms with a glance and built an industrial empire from steel, sweat, and the sheer force of his will, now lay as a frail, sharp-angled outline under a thin hospital blanket. His skin was the color of old parchment, stretched taut over a face that had become a skull. I stood by his bedside, playing the part of the loyal son keeping vigil. That's what the world expected, what the board of directors expected, and what the nurses with their pitying looks expected. I was Julian Vance after all. Appearance was everything. He hadn't spoken in 2 days, his consciousness drifting on a tide of medication and fatigue. The doctors had given him hours, then a day, then told us to just be prepared. I was prepared. I'd been preparing my entire life. Then his eyes fluttered open. There was no gentle return to awareness. One moment they were closed, the next they were open, and they weren't hazy or confused from the morphine. They were sharp, cold, and possessed a terrifying lucidity. They pinned me to the spot 3 feet from his bed. A lifetime of inadequacy washed over me under that gaze. His lips, dry and cracked like parched earth, parted with a faint, papery sound. He summoned the last of his formidable strength, not for a tender farewell, not for a final piece of wisdom, but for 5 words. 5 words that he wielded like a blade, severing me from my past, my present, and my future. 5 words that detonated my entire world. I don't have a son. And just like that, as if the words themselves had cut the cord to his own life, the steady rhythmic beep of the monitor dissolved into one long, final, deafening tone. The sound of a flatline. The sound of my life ending before it had even begun. My father was a ghost in our own mansion. He haunted its halls, a man made of ambition, anger, and the lingering, oppressive smell of expensive cigars and disappointment. I was the source of that disappointment. His praise was a currency he refused to spend on me. His affection was a treasure locked in a vault to which I never found the key. I spent my childhood trying to earn a single glance of approval. I brought home perfect report cards and he'd nod, asking why it wasn't a semester ahead. I won a regional equestrian trophy and he'd complain about the cost of stabling the horse. Instead, his rare smiles, the fleeting moments of warmth that broke through his icy exterior, were reserved for Leo, the groundskeeper's son. Leo was a quiet, hard-working kid a few years older than me. He always lingered at the edges of our sprawling property, and for some inexplicable reason at the edges of my father's life. I remember my 12th birthday with piercing clarity. I was given a brand new gleaming red sports car, a scaled-down but fully functional model that was absurdly extravagant for a child. I was showing it off to my equally spoiled friends on the main drive when my father walked by. He didn't break his stride. His face was a mask of utter indifference. His only comment was a grumbled complaint to my mother about the insurance liability. Later that afternoon, the sting of his dismissal still fresh, I saw him out by the gardens. He was laughing with Leo. A full-throated, genuine laugh that echoed in the manicured space. Leo was holding up a birdhouse he'd constructed from scrap wood left over from a patio repair. It was simple, a little crooked but sturdy. My father clapped Leo on the shoulder, a gesture of physical affection I hadn't received in years, and told him he had a good head on his shoulders, that he built things to last. Coming from a man who built an empire, it was the highest possible praise. To me, Leo was just a charity case, a project my father used to feel magnanimous, a convenient tool to highlight my own perceived failings. I resented him for the attention he stole, for the quiet approval he received that was rightfully mine. I saw him as a weed in our perfectly manicured garden, and I couldn't wait for the day I'd have the power to pull him out by the roots. That day was supposed to be the day my father died. In the weeks leading up to his final decline, as he grew weaker, I grew stronger. I was practically running the company, a role I slipped into with the ease of a bespoke suit. I was making the calls, chairing the meetings with the board, assuring them of a smooth and seamless transition. I spoke of new blood and modernizing the old guard's vision. I was measuring the drapes in his cavernous office with my eyes, picturing my own reflection in the polished surface of his enormous oak desk. The throne was nearly vacant and I was ready to claim it. I visited him every day at the hospital, not out of love but out of duty. A son had to look like a son after all. The optics were important. I'd sit in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic, and scroll through market reports and company analytics on my phone while he slept. I was managing his empire from his deathbed, a grim irony that wasn't lost on me. I saw it as a dress rehearsal. I was waiting for my life to finally begin. And then he woke up. He looked right through me as if I were a stranger who had wandered into his room by mistake. I don't have a son. The words weren't filled with rage or senile confusion. They were a statement of fact. A judgment delivered with his last rattling breath. As the doctors and nurses rushed in, a flurry of blue scrubs and quiet urgency, pushing me aside, the phrase echoed in the sudden horrifying silence of my skull. It was a denial of my entire existence. My father hadn't just died. With his final act, he had tried to erase me. The call from his lawyer, a man named Abernathy who had served my father for 40 years, came the next morning. His voice was a dry rustle of paper, entirely devoid of sympathy. He requested my presence for the reading of the will at 2 o'clock sharp. As he was about to hang up, he added, with what I now recognize as deliberate precision, "Mr. Leo will also be in attendance." Of course he would be. The charity case had to be given his parting gift, I thought with a sneer. A few $1,000s, maybe one of the older company cars, as a final thank you for mowing the lawns and building birdhouses. A pittance to show the world how benevolent Arthur Vance had been, even to the staff. The lawyer's office was suffocating. It was a museum of my father's power, lined with leather-bound books he'd never read and pictures of him shaking hands with powerful men. The air was thick with the smell of old paper, lemon polish, and judgment. I sat on one side of a polished mahogany table, radiating impatience. On the other sat Leo, looking profoundly uncomfortable in a borrowed suit that was slightly too big in the shoulders. He wouldn't meet my eyes, choosing instead to stare at his own tightly clasped hands. Abernathy cleared his throat, a loud, theatrical sound in the quiet room. He put on a pair of reading glasses and began to read the last will and testament of Arthur Vance. The legal jargon washed over me, a litany of trusts, bequests to distant cousins, donations to museums. I feigned interest, waiting for the main event. Then he got to the point. "To my son," he read, and I physically leaned forward, a triumphant smirk already forming on my face. This was it. The coronation. "Leo." The room went silent, but for the frantic pounding in my ears. I was certain I had misheard. A joke. A cruel final test from the old man. But Abernathy continued, his voice a monotone drone that was delivering my execution. "To my son Leo I leave the entirety of my estate. Vance Industries, including all shares and controlling interest, all properties real and personal, my complete stock portfolio, and all liquid assets. I leave him the legacy he helped me build through his character and the future he has earned through his integrity." My breath caught in my chest. He kept reading. Clause after clause, billion after billion, it all went to Leo. The groundskeeper's son. The sprawling mansion, the penthouse in the city, the fleet of cars, the company I was supposed to lead. Everything. It was all his. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Abernathy adjusted his glasses and looked at me, his eyes holding a flicker of something that might have been pity. "To Julian," he read, and I could feel the bile rising in my throat. "I leave the small box held in my personal safe and the following words. The truth will cost you everything, but it is all you deserve." That was it. My entire inheritance. A box and a riddle. I snapped. A primal roar of disbelief and fury tore from my throat. I shot out of my chair, the heavy wood scraping violently against the floor. I screamed at Abernathy, calling him a fraud, a doddering old fool who was complicit in this theft. I turned on Leo, my face inches from his, spitting with rage. I accused him of being a con artist, a parasite who had whispered poison into a dying old man's ear. Leo just stood there, his face pale and stricken, and whispered, "I'm sorry, Julian. I didn't know. I swear I had no idea." His pity, his genuine heartfelt sorrow for me, was more insulting than the disinheritance itself. I stormed out, slamming the heavy office door behind me, leaving my entire life behind in that suffocating room. My entire life was a lie. My inheritance, my name, everything was snatched away in an instant. What would you have done in that moment? For me, the only thing left was to find out why I drove back to the mansion, the place I had called home my entire life, knowing I was now a trespasser. A ghost. In a fit of pure, unadulterated rage, I went to my father's study, the one room I was rarely allowed to enter. I found the small locked box on his desk. It wasn't ornate or valuable. It was a simple plain wooden thing. I didn't have a key, so I smashed it against the stone fireplace with guttural force until the cheap lock gave way. Inside, nestled in worn velvet, was a single, black USB drive. No note, no explanation. Just that. My hands shaking with a mixture of rage and dread, I plugged it into my father's desktop computer. A single video file appeared on the screen. The file name was The Truth. I clicked it. My father's face filled the screen. He was in his study, looking gaunt and sick, but his eyes were the same ones I saw in the hospital. Sharp and clear. He looked directly into the camera as if he were looking right at me, across time and through the veil of death itself. "Julian," he began, and his voice was steady, imbued with the cold authority I knew so well. If you are watching this, it means I am gone and you have been left with nothing but questions. You believe you are entitled to my fortune. You are not. But you deserve answers. Not because I owe you anything, but because the truth is a debt that has been outstanding for far too long. He took a slow, deliberate breath. Your mother and I had a difficult marriage. It was a merger, not a romance. Two powerful families uniting. You were born not out of love, but out of a desperate act of betrayal. Shortly after we were married, she had an affair. A brief, meaningless fling. When she discovered she was pregnant, she passed the child off as mine to secure her place in this family. To secure your place. The world tilted on its axis. The floor felt like it was falling away beneath me. I wasn't his son. The coldness, the distance, the constant, unspoken disappointment. It all clicked into place with horrifying, nauseating clarity. I found out the truth when you were a boy, he continued, his voice unwavering. A routine blood test for a minor surgery revealed an incompatibility. I hired a private investigator. The report he delivered confirmed my suspicions. I could have divorced her, exposed you both, but the scandal would have destroyed the company I had built from nothing. So I made a deal with her. A cold corporate contract. I would raise you as a Vance, give you the name and all the privilege that came with it. But you would never be my son. You were a living reminder of your mother's deceit, a symbol of my own failure, and I could never ever bring myself to love you. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My entire identity was a sham, a business arrangement. A 30-year-long performance. But he wasn't finished. But life has a strange way of balancing the books, he said, a flicker of something new, something akin to warmth, in his eyes. While my marriage was a lie, I found a truth of my own. I fell in love. A quiet, honest love with a woman who wanted nothing from me. A woman who worked on our grounds. Your groundskeeper's wife, Elena. My mind flashed to Leo's mother, a kind, quiet woman who always had a warm smile and dirt under her fingernails. A woman I barely noticed. Leo, my father said, and his voice finally cracked, a fissure in the granite. Leo is my son. My biological son. The product of that love. I couldn't claim him publicly without destroying his family and admitting my own role in the web of lies. So I kept him close in the only way I could. I watched him from afar. I mentored him, I taught him the value of hard work, not inheritance. I watched him grow into a man of integrity and strength, a man who builds things to last. In my will, I have finally given him the birthright that you have so arrogantly claimed your entire life. The video ended. I sat there in the dark, the monitor's glow reflecting my own hollow alien face. I was nobody. The son of an anonymous affair. A placeholder. A ghost in my own life, just like my father had been. Leo wasn't the weed in the garden. I was. In the weeks that followed, the world moved on without me. My key cards stopped working. My credit cards were declined. The friends who had orbited my wealth vanished like smoke. I was evicted from the mansion, a security guard I'd known for years unable to meet my eyes as he escorted me to the gate with a single suitcase. Leo, the secret billionaire, took the helm of Vance Industries. And he thrived. News reports praised his quiet competence, his humility. He instituted profit sharing for factory workers and invested in green energy, things my father had always dismissed. He was leading with a quiet competence that earned him the respect of the entire board. A month after the funeral, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. It was Leo. There was no gloating in his voice, only a deep, profound sadness for the hand we'd both been dealt. He offered me what he called a severance package. A generous sum, enough to start a new life, far away from the wreckage of the old one. He said it was the right thing to do. I, the great Julian Vance, took the charity. Because for the first time in my life I knew it was all I deserved. I lost a fortune, a name, and a future. But in return I was given the truth. It was a brutal, devastating truth that stripped me of everything I thought I was. My father was a cruel man, but he was right about one thing. The truth was the only real inheritance he had to give me. Stripped of the Vance name, the money, the privilege. Who was I? For the first time I have to figure that out. And now I have to build something of my own. Not from steel or money, but from the ruins of a life that was never mine to begin with. They say the truth will set you free, but for me it came at the cost of everything. If you think justice was served, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that will make you question everything you think you know about family. Remember to share, like, and drop your comment. My entitled family thought they won until karma hit hard. 4 years, my family pretended to be a loving unit, a tightly knit group navigating the world together. On social media and at holiday gatherings, we were the picture of success and mutual support. But that picture was a carefully constructed fiction, a facade built with my money and painted over with my silent sacrifices. All the while they smiled for the cameras, they were secretly drawing up plans to bleed me completely dry, to take everything I had and leave me with nothing but the bill. They celebrated their victory far too early, never once imagining that the foundation they were standing on was me, and that I was about to walk away. This is the story of how their gilded world came crashing down, not with a sudden dramatic bang, but with the slow, inevitable and crushing weight of their own insatiable greed. On the outside, we looked picture perfect. A hardworking dad, a loving mom and 3 kids. But behind closed doors that family portrait was a mirage. I'm 29 now, but this story really begins almost a decade ago, right after I graduated from college. I landed a great job in software development and I was thrilled. I thought my salary was a ticket to my own future, a chance to build a life. I had no idea my family saw it as their personal retirement fund. I became, for all intents and purposes, the family ATM. It started so innocently. It always does, doesn't it? The first time my mom called in a quiet panic. The property tax bill was due and they were a few $100s short. Just until your father's next check, she promised, her voice laced with a mother's gentle guilt. Of course I sent the money. The relief and gratitude in her voice were intoxicating. I felt like a hero, the responsible son saving the day. A few weeks later it was a utility bill. Then my dad needed new tires for his car so he could keep looking for work. Each time I was showered with praise. "What would we do without you?" they'd say. That praise became a currency of its own, a drug I didn't know I was getting addicted to. Here and there, slowly but surely became the norm. The requests grew bolder. My parents, both healthy and perfectly capable of working, just stopped. They slid into a comfortable, cozy semi-retirement, entirely funded by me. My dad's job searches became a running joke. He'd spend an hour on the computer and then declare the market was just too tough for a man his age. My salary was no longer my own. It was a river that flowed directly into their bank account, covering their mortgage, their escalating grocery bills, their car payments, and their ever-expanding taste for the finer things in life. One month it was a top-of-the-line espresso machine. The next, my mom decided she needed a whole new wardrobe from her favorite department store. I once came home to find a massive new smart TV mounted on the wall. When I asked my dad about it, he just clapped me on the shoulder and said, "We deserve a little comfort, son. You work so hard for us." Thus was clear. I wasn't part of it. I was the engine that made it run. My brother, Marcus, 2 years my junior, saw the example our parents set and followed it with religious devotion. He was content to drift in a dead-end part-time retail job, showing zero ambition to do anything more. Why would he? He lived at home rent-free, and any time he was short on cash for a night out or a new video game, he knew who to call. "Just pick up the slack," my dad would say with a wink, as if it were my designated role. When I tried to talk to Marcus about his future, he'd just laugh. "Why kill myself working a 9-to-5 grind like you?" he'd ask. "You've got everything under control. I'm just enjoying the ride." But the real star of our parasitic galaxy was my younger sister, Lucy. The golden child. The family's delicate, creative genius who could do no wrong. While I was given constant lectures about family duty and financial responsibility, Lucy was praised for her free spirit. This was just a family-approved euphemism for her complete inability to hold down a job for more than a few months. My money was the fuel for her endless, fleeting passions. One month I was funding an expensive photography course. I bought the high-end camera, the lenses, the editing software, over $5,000 in total. She went to 3 classes, decided the instructor was uninspired, and the camera found a permanent home in the back of her closet. The next, it was a jewelry-making business. I paid for silver, gemstones, and specialized tools. She made 3 bracelets, sold one to our aunt for $20, and declared the market too saturated. Each failed venture was met with supportive murmurs from our parents. "She just needs to find her true calling," my mom would say. "You can't rush an artist." They loved playing the part of a proud family, telling friends and relatives how incredibly successful and generous their oldest son was. But in private, when they thought I wasn't listening, the truth would slip out. I'd overhear them in the kitchen, my mom telling my dad, "He's so boring, isn't he? All he does is work. He has no spontaneity." My dad would chuckle and reply, "Let him be boring. His predictability pays the bills." They didn't see my discipline as a virtue. They saw it as a resource, a utility to be exploited. They didn't see me, their son. They saw a walking, talking bank account. And they were getting ready to make one final massive withdrawal that would drain the account for good. The day the facade finally shattered for me was a Sunday afternoon, one of those deceptively peaceful days in late summer. My parents called a family meeting, something usually reserved for announcing vacation plans I would be expected to pay for. They sat me down at the dining room table, a plate of store-bought cookies between us. They were beaming, smiling at me with an unnerving mixture of pride and pity, like they'd just won the lottery and were about to bestow a great honor upon me. "Son," my father began, leaning forward with conspiratorial excitement, "your mother and I have made a big decision. We're officially retiring." He said it with such finality as if it were a royal decree. They then launched into their brilliant plan. They were going to sell the family home, the house I grew up in, the only significant asset our family possessed. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I assumed they'd use the equity to fund their retirement. I was naive. "And here's the best part," my mother chirped, clapping her hands together. "We're going to give all the money from the sale to Lucy." My sister, sitting beside them, preened. Apparently she needed a significant capital investment for her latest, most groundbreaking business idea yet. A line of high-end, artisanal, eco-friendly, chakra-lined candles. She claimed it was going to be the next big thing in wellness. A cold dread washed over me as the next piece of their puzzle slid into place. "So where will you live?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Oh, we've already found the most wonderful place," my dad boomed, pulling a real estate brochure from a folder. It was a beautiful, sprawling rental home in a gated community much closer to the city, with a golf course and a community pool. The rent was nearly double my own monthly mortgage payment. My role in this master plan was horrifyingly simple. I was expected to sign the lease and pay the rent. And their utilities. And their groceries. And their club fees. Indefinitely. I was to finance their luxurious retirement and my sister's six-figure hobby, while being completely written out of the only real asset our family had ever built. An asset my income had maintained for the better part of a decade. They didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. They looked triumphant. For years I had swallowed my frustration. I had bitten my tongue and opened my wallet to keep the peace, to maintain the illusion of the happy family. But in that moment, hearing them lay out the plan for my complete and total financial ruin, something inside me didn't just snap. It disintegrated. It was the sheer, unadulterated entitlement. It was the gleeful tone in their voices. They weren't asking for my help. They were informing me of my obligations. They were declaring with smiles on their faces that they owned my future. I let them finish their grand, self-congratulatory speech. I listened to my mother talk about how this was for the best, how family sticks together, and how proud they were of Lucy for finally taking initiative. I waited for a pause, the moment they were all looking at me, expecting me to nod and ask where to sign. I took a slow breath and said the two words they had never ever heard from me before. "No. I'm not doing that." The silence that followed was deafening. It was like a bomb had gone off and the sound hadn't caught up yet. My mother's smile froze and then melted away. Lucy's smug expression curdled into disbelief. My father's face, a moment ago so jovial, began to turn a dangerous shade of purple. He was the first to explode. "What did you just say?" he roared, slamming his hand on the table. My mother burst into theatrical tears, wailing about how she had failed as a mother to have raised such a selfish, ungrateful son. "After everything we've given you," she sobbed. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Lucy just scoffed, crossing her arms. "Wow. A traitor to your own family. I knew you'd show your true colors eventually. You're just jealous of my ambition." Marcus, as usual, just stared at the floor, wanting to be anywhere else. The argument was pointless. Their minds were made up. They weren't trying to convince me, they were trying to command me. They stormed out of my house, spitting insults and threats. They were utterly, completely confident that I'd crumble. That I'd come crawling back in a day or two, wallet in hand, begging for forgiveness. They were already celebrating. They thought they had won. What they didn't understand was that by saying no, I was the one who had finally won my freedom. The weeks that followed were a relentless storm of emotional blackmail. My phone became a weapon used against me. My voicemail filled up with messages that swung wildly between volcanic rage and pathetic tear-soaked guilt trips. My father left messages detailing exactly how I had failed as a son, calling me a disgrace. My mother would call, sobbing, recounting all the sacrifices she made for me as a child, ending each call with, "I don't know how you can sleep at night." Lucy sent a barrage of texts, calling me every name in the book and telling me I was dead to her. Marcus just sent one text, "You really messed up this time." I ignored every single one. I blocked their numbers. I created a filter to send their emails directly to a folder I never opened. Then I did something I hadn't done in 10 years. I made a decision entirely for myself. I packed up my life, put my house on the market and moved into a smaller, more manageable apartment on the other side of town. It was a fortress of solitude. For the first time in my adult life, when my paycheck hit my bank account, it was actually my own. The silence in my new apartment was jarring at first. It was the absence of constant need, of endless demands. And after a few days I realized it wasn't silence. It was peace. While they were busy torching the bridges behind them, I was methodically building my own. You know, that little side hustle they always mocked me for? That small software project I tinkered with in the few spare hours I had late at night? Well, without the constant drain on my finances and my mental energy, it had started to get serious. I reinvested my own money, the money that would have been paying for their golf club fees, back into my project. I hired a small team of freelance developers. I polished the user interface. I went all in on myself for the first time ever. Meanwhile, I'd get occasional cautious updates from my Aunt Carol, my mom's sister and the only member of my extended family who saw the dynamic for what it was. She was my scout on the inside. She told me they'd sold the house in record time. Just as they'd planned, they handed Lucy a cashier's check for nearly $500,000. They threw a massive new beginnings party at a fancy restaurant. My aunt said they made toast after toast to cutting out negativity, to new chapters, and to Lucy's guaranteed success as a future suit. They had won. They were rich, free, and didn't need their ungrateful son anymore. But my aunt ended the call with a worried tone. "They're burning through that money at a shocking speed," she warned. "Your dad got a new convertible. Your mom is redecorating the entire rental house. And Lucy's business seems to involve a lot of five-star dinners with potential investors and not a lot of actual candle making." The whole charade came to its spectacular, glorious end at my aunt's annual Christmas Eve party. It was the one family event I never missed. This year I almost skipped it, but Aunt Carol insisted I come. "You have nothing to be ashamed of," she told me over the phone. "Hold your head high and let them see you thriving." So I went. I walked into a scene of pure, undiluted smugness. My parents and Lucy were holding court in the center of the living room, decked out in expensive new clothes. They were laughing too loudly, showing off photos of their new home and making loud, pointed comments for my benefit. "It's just amazing how much your life improves when you're not held back by unsupportive people," my mother announced to a group of cousins staring right at me. I just smiled, got a drink, and talked to my other relatives, ignoring the performance. Then, about an hour into the party, Aunt Carol, a woman who never raises her voice and doesn't waste a single word, calmly walked over to the group. She waited for a lull in my father's boasting. "Jim," she said, her voice clear and cutting right through the party chatter. "It's so wonderful to see you all doing so well. Which is why I was so confused when you called me last week asking to borrow $5,000. You could have heard a pin drop. It was a perfect record scratch moment. Every conversation stopped. Every eye in the room swiveled to my father. His face went through a rapid theatrical series of transformations, from smug satisfaction to wide-eyed panic and finally to pure, sputtering fury. He started screaming, pointing a shaking finger at my aunt, calling her a liar and a troublemaker. He accused me of poisoning her mind against them. It was a full-blown public meltdown. My mother started crying, not her usual manipulative tears, but harsh, ugly sobs of humiliation. They grabbed their coats, spitting insults at anyone who dared to make eye contact, and stormed out of the party, dragging a shell-shocked Lucy and a ghostly white Marcus behind them. The perfect family mask hadn't just cracked. It had been publicly shattered into a million pieces. That was just the first domino. In the weeks that followed, their world imploded. As my aunt had predicted, the house money was gone. Utterly and completely vanished. Lucy's artisanal candle company had produced nothing but a mountain of credit card receipts for designer clothes, spa treatments and lavish trips, all filed under research and development. The eviction notice for their fancy rental arrived right on schedule. And now, with their reputation in tatters and every bridge with the extended family burned to ash, they had absolutely nowhere to go. The first message I received in the aftermath wasn't a call, but an email. It was from Marcus. It was a long, rambling, desperate, and frankly pathetic tirade. With nowhere else to go, my parents had been forced to move into the two-bedroom apartment he shared with Lucy. It was, he wrote, a living hell. Our parents refused to even look for work, insisting they were retired, and that it was their children's duty to care for them. They demanded the same expensive lifestyle they had grown accustomed to, guilting him and Lucy for every dollar spent on rent or groceries. His life savings were gone. He was drowning in debt they were racking up under his roof. And of course in the end he blamed me. "This is all your fault," the email concluded. "If you hadn't been so selfish and abandoned us, none of this would be happening. You did this to us." I deleted the email without replying. A month later my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. It was Lucy. She was sobbing uncontrollably, her voice choked and hysterical. Through the torrent of tears and gasps she admitted everything. The plan was always to live off me forever. The candle business was a complete sham from the start. She even confessed that our dad had been secretly draining his own retirement accounts for months before they even sold the house, funneling her money to fund her lifestyle, which is why they were so desperate for me to take over their expenses. Now their landlord was kicking all four of them out of the apartment. She begged me, pleaded with me to co-sign a new lease for them, to give them some money to get back on their feet. And then she said the words that made the entire situation poetically, tragically perfect. "They're so lazy," she cried, talking about our parents. "They just sit on the couch all day and expect us to take care of everything." The breathtaking irony was completely, utterly lost on her that it's truly amazing how fast a foundation built on greed can turn to dust. They were so certain they had won the war that they never bothered to build a lifeboat. Their victory party was held on the deck of a sinking ship. So I have to ask you, have any of you ever been the designated responsible one in a family that only knew how to take? What was the moment you finally said, no? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Did I listen to Lucy's frantic, tearful pleas? And for the first time in my entire life, when faced with their manufactured crises, I felt nothing. No anger, no resentment, no pity. Just a profound and unshakable quiet. The emotional hold they'd had on me for decades was finally broken. "No, Lucy," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I'm not going to help." I explained as simply and dispassionately as I could, that these were the natural consequences of their own actions. "You all made a series of choices," I told her. "You chose to stop working. You chose to sell the house. You chose to spend $500,000 on nothing. You chose to lay out a plan that would have ruined me. These are your consequences to live with, not mine. I am not a bank and I am no longer your safety net." The call ended, and with it my last tie to their self-inflicted chaos. The family as I knew it simply imploded. My parents were forced to move into a tiny, run-down, government-subsidized apartment in a bad part of town, the reality of their golden years, a far cry from the golf course community they'd envisioned. Marcus and Lucy, now deep in debt and legally and morally trapped into caring for two able-bodied but resolutely unemployed parents, were miserable. Their resentment for our parents grew daily, but it was matched only by their burning resentment for me, the one who got away. After the Christmas Eve disaster, the rest of the extended family wanted nothing to do with them, leaving them completely isolated on an island of their own making. My company took off. The success they had mocked became my reality. The boring work I did day after day built me a life of stability and peace they could only dream of. I eventually sold the software to a larger tech firm for an amount that would have made their heads spin, but they'll never know. I live a quiet, stable life that I built for myself on my own terms. I didn't plan their downfall. I never orchestrated some grand, vengeful scheme. I just stepped aside. I stopped holding them up and I let them run headfirst into the wall they had built themselves. They thought they had won by cutting me out, but all they really did was sever their one and only lifeline. The best revenge, I've learned, isn't loud and explosive. It's the quiet, profound satisfaction of living well and letting karma handle the rest. If you watch this story this far, hit that subscribe button, share, like, and drop your comment. Remember to tell us where you are watching from. The dark secret behind my family's money just destroyed us. My entire life changed the day I opened a letter that wasn't mine. It showed up at my apartment by mistake. A simple white envelope, crisp and impersonal, with my family's home address printed right above mine. A simple mail sorting error, I assumed. The mailman must have just gotten confused. But inside wasn't a birthday card or some casual note from a relative. It was the first thread I pulled that unraveled the dark, suffocating secret behind my family's money. A secret that ignited a war between us. A brutal, quiet war from which none of us would ever truly recover. It was a war fought not on a battlefield, but in the sterile silence of lawyers' offices and over the polished wood of our own dining room table. That I always thought we were the perfect family, defined by our staggering wealth and a bond that seemed absolutely unbreakable. We were the envy of everyone we knew. But it was all a lie. A carefully constructed, beautifully maintained lie that cost us everything. And it all started with that one terrifying piece of paper, an ordinary bill that would become the death certificate for the life I thought I knew. Growing up, the world felt like it was ours for the taking. We didn't just live in a nice house, we lived in the house on the block. You know the one. The sprawling colonial revival with the perfectly manicured lawn that looked like a green velvet carpet, the 3-car garage filled with pristine German cars, and a backyard that looked like it was ripped from a 5-star resort brochure. There was a tennis court we barely used and a pool that was professionally cleaned twice a week. My dad was the architect of this perfect life, the master of our universe. He was a guy who seemed to turn everything he touched into gold. He was impossibly charismatic, brilliant, and just radiated this aura of untouchable success. He'd walk into a room and the center of gravity would shift right to him. My mother was his perfect counterpart, impossibly elegant, perpetually graceful, and the perfect hostess for an endless stream of dinner parties where the laughter and expensive wine flowed as freely as water. She curated our lives, ensuring every detail was flawless, from the flower arrangements to the social calendar. Our lives were just a highlight reel of glorious excess. Summers were spent on the sun-drenched coasts of Italy, staying in villas overlooking the sea. Winters were a blur of private ski lessons and roaring fires in sprawling aspen chalets. I never once had to check a price tag. I never worried about a single bill or the cost of anything. Money was just this abstract concept, a magical force that was always there, solving every problem before it even had a chance to become one. It was our identity, the ultimate proof that we'd made it. My brother Leo and I were the princes of this little kingdom, completely insulated from the harsh realities of the real world. We were taught to value success above all else, and success in our family had a very specific look and feel. I remember one evening I was about 16 sitting with my dad in his study. It was this cathedral of success, all dark wood leather-bound books he'd never read, and the faint, sweet smell of his expensive cigars. I asked him how he did it all, how he built this empire from what he claimed was scratch. He leaned back in his enormous leather chair, took a slow puff of his cigar and just smiled with this distinct glint in his eye. "Hard work and smart risks, kid," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. "You gotta be willing to play the game harder than anyone else. You can't be afraid to go all in." I took that as gospel. He wasn't just my father. He was my hero, the blueprint for the man I desperately wanted to become. He made it all look so effortless, so deserved. Looking back now, I can see the cracks were there the whole time, like fine fissures in a porcelain doll, hidden just beneath the shimmering, perfect surface. My mother's smile was sometimes a little too tight, her grip on her wine glass a little too firm. My father would occasionally disappear for a day or two on what he called business trips, returning tired but with a manic energy that I now recognize as something else entirely. His smart risks were a much darker and more desperate game than I could have ever imagined. He wasn't playing the game was playing him. The entire illusion shattered on a completely unremarkable Tuesday. I was 26, living in a nice apartment in the city, trying to make my own way, which was, of course, a laughable effort funded by a generous monthly allowance from my father. The letter was a final notice for a business loan, a staggering 6-figure sum that made my breath catch in my throat. My father's name was on it, but the lender was some obscure company I'd never heard of, something with "ventures" in the title. First I just laughed it off. This had to be a sophisticated scam, a simple mistake. I picked up the phone to call my dad, fully expecting him to chuckle with me and tell me to toss it in the shredder. He didn't. There was this split second of dead, heavy silence on the line, a void so thick and absolute it felt like the air was being sucked out of the room. It was only a moment, but it stretched into an eternity. Then his voice, tight and strained in a way I'd never heard before, said, "It's a clerical error, son. Don't worry about it. I'll handle it." He dismissed it way too fast. He was too defensive, his usual easygoing charm replaced by a brittle sharpness. For the first time in my entire life, I didn't believe a word he said. That brief, chilling conversation was the first domino. It planted a seed of doubt that immediately began to grow, twisting its thick, ugly roots around the very foundation of my world. And that's when I knew I had to find out more. The doubt became an obsession, a gnawing feeling in my gut that wouldn't go away. The next time I went home for our obligatory Sunday dinner, I did something I had never done in my life. I waited until my parents had gone to bed and I went into my father's home office, a room that had always been his sacred off-limits space. I felt like a criminal, a trespasser in my own home. My heart was pounding with every creak of the old floorboards, my hands slick with sweat. I started looking, not even sure what I was searching for. I just had this gut feeling that something was terribly wrong. I started with his desk, sifting through neat stacks of papers. Nothing. It was all legitimate business dealings, charity donations, club memberships. Then I moved to the filing cabinet. It was locked. Of course it was locked. A wave of panic and frustration washed over me. I was about to give up when I remembered he sometimes kept a spare key in the humidor on his desk. My hand trembled as I opened it. There, beneath a row of expensive cigars, was a small brass key. My breath hitched. With a click, the cabinet unlocked. I started in the front, pulling out folders. Taxes, household, investments. It all looked normal. But in the very back of the bottom drawer, tucked behind old tax returns from a decade ago, I found a folder. It was thin, unlabeled, nothing special. Inside were statements for a credit card I never knew he had. The balance was almost maxed out. Tens of thousands of dollars in debt. I scanned the transaction history, my blood running cold. There were cash advances from casino cages in Las Vegas and Atlantic City. Dozens of charges for online sports betting sites, some for thousands of dollars at a time. This wasn't the man I knew. The man I knew preached fiscal responsibility and scoffed at get-rich-quick schemes. But what I found next was even worse. Deeper in the cabinet, in another unmarked folder, I found documents for secret investments. And not the blue-chip stocks he'd brag about at dinner parties, but these high-risk, highly speculative ventures, oil futures, volatile biotech startups, cryptocurrency schemes, that had obviously blown up in his face. There were printed out emails with increasingly desperate pleas to investment managers, talk of margin calls and catastrophic, irrecoverable losses. He wasn't just taking risks, he was gambling. Recklessly, pathologically gambling away our entire future. Finding this stuff felt like a deep, profound betrayal, like a kind of financial infidelity that made me question every memory, every piece of advice, every success he'd ever claimed. The final, devastating piece of the puzzle clicked into place when I found a thick document for a second mortgage on our house. The perfect home, the symbol of all our success and security, was leveraged to the hilt to fund his secret life. He hadn't built an empire. He'd built a house of cards, propped up by lies and debt, and the slightest breeze was about to bring it all crashing down. That I couldn't carry this apocalyptic weight alone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial my brother's number. I called Leo, my voice a broken whisper as I told him everything from the loan notice to the maxed-out credit cards to the second mortgage. He was silent on the other end of the line for a long time, so long that I thought the call had dropped. Then all he said, his voice flat and cold, was, "We have to tell Mom. Tonight." We staged what felt less like an intervention and more like a tribunal. The three of us, me, a trembling Leo, and my mother, who we had just briefed in her sitting room, sat on one side of our massive, polished dining room table. My father sat on the other, a king alone in his castle. Felt like a courtroom. I laid the papers out on the wood surface between us. The loan default, the casino credit card bills, the mortgage document. All the stark black and white evidence of his lies. The silence in the room was deafening. At first he tried to deny it, to deploy the charm and charisma that had always been his greatest weapons. He laughed it off, calling it a misunderstanding, a series of manageable business setbacks. But his eyes, darting between the incriminating papers and our stony faces, gave away the raw panic churning beneath his composed facade. My mother just stared at the documents, her face completely pale as if all the blood had drained from it. She picked up one of the casino statements, her hand trembling so violently the paper rattled. The betrayal she felt was so raw, so palpable. It was like discovering he'd been having an affair for their entire marriage. In a way he had. This was the ultimate act of deceit, a lie that shattered the very foundation of their partnership. When the full, unvarnished truth finally came spilling out, the sheer scale of the gambling, the secret loans from friends he'd sworn he was helping, the devastating, life-altering losses, the room just erupted. My mother's profound grief turned into pure, white-hot rage. She screamed at him, her voice cracking with pain and decades of unspoken frustrations, a feeling like a decorative accessory to his success, came pouring out. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the lies. The decades of deception. He had made a complete and utter mockery of their life together, of her role as his partner. Then Leo just exploded. He had always idolized our father even more than I did, and his feeling of betrayal was visceral and violent. He lunged across the table, calling him a liar, a fraud, a pathetic old man. My father, stripped of all his power and secrets, didn't even flinch. He just sat there, shrinking in his chair, a broken man being consumed by the wreckage he had created. I tried to be the peacemaker, to find some way to fix it, to suggest a plan, but there was nothing left to fix. The damage was too deep. The trust that holds a family together hadn't just been cracked. It had been pulverized into dust. That confrontation was the first shot fired in the war. My mother filed for divorce the next week. The whole process became this brutal, ugly battleground as her lawyers dug up even more hidden accounts and secret debts, each new discovery another betrayal. The fight ripped through our extended family, forcing relatives and friends to take sides, bringing up old, buried arguments and resentments. Leo sided completely and unequivocally with my mother, cutting off all contact with my dad. He looked at me with open contempt because I couldn't bring myself to completely abandon the man, even if he was a ghost. Our family didn't just break. It splintered into a million warring pieces. The fallout was swift and brutal. The house was sold at a massive loss to cover just a fraction of the astronomical debts. The German cars were repossessed one humiliating afternoon. We were financially and socially ruined. The perfect, polished image we had so carefully projected to the world came crashing down in the most public and mortifying way imaginable. The destruction of a family is a quiet, brutal thing. It happens behind closed doors, in whispered arguments and slammed doors, fueled by secrets most people never see. The wreckage isn't always visible from the outside. Have you ever experienced a secret that tore your family apart? Share your story in the comments below. It's important to know you're not alone. And if you want to hear more stories about navigating and surviving life's toughest moments, make sure you subscribe. It's been 2 years since that day. The legal battles are mostly over, but the war itself never really ended. The silence between us is its own kind of battlefield. My parents don't speak. My brother and I barely speak. Our conversations are strained, brief, and full of unspoken accusations. I see my father sometimes. He lives in a small rented apartment across town. He's a ghost of the man he used to be, haunted by the choices that cost him everything. He shuffles around his small living room, still talking about the next big thing, as if one more roll of the dice could win it all back. It's heartbreaking. The charismatic giant I grew up idolizing is gone, replaced by this frail, desperate stranger. The shock of losing all our money was one thing, but the most painful loss, the one that still keeps me up at night, was the trust. That's the one thing no amount of money can ever buy back. What my father did, what we now call financial infidelity, doesn't just empty a bank account. It destroys the emotional security a family is supposed to represent. It poisons every shared memory, making you question if any of it was ever real. I have a normal job now, an actual career I built myself. I check my bank account obsessively. I'm terrified of debt. The trauma of it all has reshaped my relationship with money, with success, with everything. I've learned the hardest, most bitter lesson of my life. Money, status, possessions, they're all illusions. They are a fragile stage set that can be dismantled overnight. The only thing that's real is the truth. The only foundation worth building a life on is honesty. My father spent his entire life chasing a fantasy of wealth and power, desperate to prove he was a winner. But in the end, he lost everything that ever truly mattered. The money is gone, and that hurts. But the real truth is, we lost our family long before we lost our fortune. We just didn't know it yet. Thanks for watching. Hit that subscribe button, share, like, and tell us where you are watching from. I exposed my family's darkest secret and they disowned me. The second I spoke the truth about my perfect brother in a room full of people who were supposed to love me, I stopped being their daughter. It all happened at my father's 60th birthday party, a night that was supposed to be a celebration of him, of our family. In front of everyone, my aunts, my uncles, all our family friends who had known me since I was born, my mother stared at me with pure, undiluted venom in her eyes and said words that cut deeper than any knife. "You've ruined this family." My father, a man I'd spent my life trying to please, stood there with his face turning a shade of purple I'd never seen before, his chest heaving with rage. He didn't scream. It was worse. He just pointed a shaking, accusatory finger toward the grand oak door of our family home. "Get out," he choked out, the words strangling him. "Get out and never come back." And just like that, for speaking a few sentences of truth that had been suffocating me for years, I was erased. My entire life, my whole identity as a daughter, as a sister, it vanished in that one horrific moment. All because I refused to keep their ugliest, most devastating secret buried any longer. Growing up, my world balanced on two fundamental, unshakable truths. My brother, David, was perfect and I was not. He was the golden child, the sun around which our entire family universe revolved. He could do no wrong. I, on the other hand, was the black sheep, the one who was always a little too loud, a little too opinionated, a little too much of everything they didn't want. And this wasn't some story I told myself. It was a dynamic our family actively, painstakingly cultivated. David's achievements were public monuments. His straight A report cards weren't just praised, they were literally framed and hung in my father's home office, a gallery of his perfection. Mine, even with good grades, were met with disappointed sighs and the soul-crushing question, why can't you be more like your brother? When David won a regional science fair in 8th grade for a model volcano that barely worked, my parents threw him a surprise party with a custom-made cake. A few years later, when I landed the lead role in the high school production of Our Town, a part one had worked on for months, they showed up 20 minutes late and left during intermission. My father later complained about the uncomfortable seating. That was it. The resentment between David and me wasn't a natural sibling rivalry. It was a wall they built between us, brick by painful brick. I wasn't just competing with my brother. I was competing with an idealized version of a son that I, as a daughter, could never ever be. For years I just accepted my role. It was easier. I was the difficult one, the scapegoat for any and all family tension. If my parents argued, it was because I'd been mouthy earlier that day. Something broke, I was the first one blamed. I learned to keep my head down, to swallow my achievements and to make myself small. But even as a kid I could sense something else was deeply wrong, something that had nothing to do with my C in algebra or my bad attitude. It was a thick, suffocating silence that would descend upon our house whenever certain topics came up. Old family pictures from before I was born, my mom's life before she met my dad, why she really had to leave her small hometown so suddenly. Any questions were shut down with a sharp, "That's in the past," or, "We don't talk about that." I learned quickly that it was safer not to ask. The secret, the real source of the rot in our family, began to unravel on my 25th birthday. I was spending the day helping my mom clean out the attic, a dusty, forgotten museum of our family's life. Tucked away inside an old, brittle shoebox, buried under her yellowed wedding veil, was a stack of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. The handwriting was elegant, masculine. They were love letters, but they weren't from my father. They were from a man named Michael, and they were dated just months before my brother David was born. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely read them. They told a story of a passionate, forbidden love affair. Of stolen moments in a world where my mother was already engaged to my father. Of a heartbreaking goodbye. The last letter, though, was the one that made my blood run cold. It was postmarked from the very town my mom had so abruptly left. In it, Michael begged my mother to tell him if the baby was his. He wrote, "I'll leave her. I swear it, Catherine. We can have a life together, a real family. I just have to know the truth. Please just tell me if he is mine." And there, in that dusty, silent attic surrounded by ghosts, it all finally clicked into place. The decades of secrets. The constant humming anxiety in our home. The real reason David was put on an untouchable pedestal and shielded from any and all criticism. His perfection wasn't just a preference. It was an absolute necessity. It was the only way to justify the massive, life-altering lie my entire family was built on. David wasn't just the golden child. He was the product of my mother's affair. The father he idolized, the man whose name he carried, was not his biological father. I carried that secret for 2 long years, and it felt like a physical weight, a sickness in my stomach. Every family gathering became a torturous performance. I'd watch my father proudly call David my son, and the lie would echo in my ears. Every holiday, every shared laugh felt like a fraud. This deception was a poison, seeping into every corner of our lives, and I knew with a terrifying certainty that it was slowly killing me. The breaking point, the moment the pressure became too much to bear, came at my father's 60th birthday party. My mother's grand idea for a gift, the pièce de résistance, was a professionally bound and researched ancestry book, tracing our family tree back for generations. The irony was so thick and bitter I felt like I was choking on it. As my dad unwrapped it, his face glowing with pride, I saw a flash of pure animal panic in my mother's eyes before she masked it with a brilliant smile. All night, my father paraded that book around the party, his voice booming with pride as he pointed to his great-grandfather the farmer, his grandfather the war hero, and finally his own name, with David's branching right off it like a royal lineage. "The legacy continues," he declared, clapping a beaming David on the back. And David, my brother, just soaked it all in, oblivious and perfect and loved. I couldn't take it anymore. This wasn't just a lie. It was a cruel, elaborate stage play, and I was the only one in the audience who knew the script was fiction. I felt this surge of adrenaline, a desperate, overwhelming need for the truth no matter the cost. I walked over to my brother, my heart pounding against my ribs. "David," I said, my voice trembling so much I barely recognized it. "There's something you should know. Something that book leaves out." My mother's head snapped in my direction, her smile gone. "Don't you dare," she hissed, her voice a low, dangerous whisper that only I could hear. But it was too late. My dad had heard me. "What's going on?" he asked, his celebratory mood evaporating in an instant. The room quieted that I took a deep, shaky breath, the air feeling thin and sharp. That Mom didn't leave her hometown for a fresh start. She left because she was pregnant. I locked eyes with my mother, whose face was now a ghostly white canvas of horror. "And Dad, you weren't the father." The silence that followed was the heaviest, most absolute silence I have ever felt. It was a physical thing pressing down on all of us. David just stared at me, his perfect smile frozen on his face, his eyes wide with a childlike confusion. He looked from me to my mom, then to my dad, desperately searching for a denial, a laugh, anything to make it not true. But the denial never came. My father turned to my mother. It wasn't a look of shock or betrayal. It was pure white-hot rage, but not for the reason I had ever imagined. It was the fury of a man whose perfectly constructed world, his legacy, had just been detonated in front of everyone. And then he turned all of that rage on me. "How could you?" he roared, his voice cracking with the force of it. "How could you do this to him? To this family?" And in that horrifying moment, I understood the final, most painful piece of the puzzle. He'd always known. For 30 years, my father had known David was not his biological son. He had actively chosen the lie. He chose to raise another man's son as his own, to pour all his pride and love into him, and to cast me, his actual flesh and blood, as the outsider, the problem child. My mother, finally finding her voice, erupted into theatrical sobs. "You're a selfish, hateful girl. You have always been jealous of your brother. This is just your sick, twisted revenge, isn't it?" That's when I said the words that sealed my fate, the words that would echo in my mind for years. "He deserved to know the truth," I said, my voice finally steady and clear. "We all did. And that was it. That was the end." My uncle, my father's brother, grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly firm, and started pulling me toward the door. My cousins, people I'd grown up with, wouldn't even look at me. It was as if I was the one who had committed the ultimate sin. Not my mother for her affair, not my father for his 30-year deception, but me for daring to speak the truth aloud. As the heavy oak door slammed shut behind me, the last thing I heard was my father's voice, ragged with fury, yelling, "You have no family here." The first few weeks after the party were a blur of raw pain and utter disbelief. My phone calls went straight to voicemail. My texts, filled with desperate pleas to just talk, went unanswered, marked only by the cold green delivered status. Finally, the delivered disappeared altogether. I was blocked. My emails vanished into a digital void. When I drove to the house a week later, my key wouldn't turn in the lock. He'd had them changed. I was completely, utterly alone. Being disowned is a strange and brutal kind of grief. It's like a death, but you're the ghost, forced to haunt a world that has unanimously decided you no longer exist. I completely spiraled. I replayed that night over and over, questioning my sanity, my memories, everything. Was I the monster they all said I was? My entire life I had been fed the narrative that I was difficult, too sensitive, just fundamentally wrong. This spectacular rejection felt like the final, irrefutable confirmation. The shame was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket that made it hard to breathe. I felt like I had done something so monstrous that I was unworthy of family, of love, of anything. The final, most devastating blow came from David, the one person I thought naively that I was doing this for. A week after the party, before he blocked me on everything, he sent me one last text message. It said, "I don't know who my father is, but I know who my sister isn't. You destroyed my life. I hope you're happy." His world had been shattered, and instead of being angry with the people who had lied to him for 3 decades, he aimed all of his pain and rage directly at me. I was the easier target. The loneliness was the hardest part. It was a constant, gnawing presence. The first Thanksgiving came and went in total silence. On my birthday, my phone remained dark. I'd be scrolling through social media and a photo would pop up from a cousin. A family barbecue, a holiday party, and I'd see them all there, smiling, laughing, living their lives as if there wasn't a gaping hole where I used to be. It was a constant, sharp reminder that their world was spinning on just fine, maybe even better, without me in it. I had to learn how to be a person all on my own, to build an entirely new life from the rubble of my old one. That first year was about one thing and one thing only: survival. I found a therapist, a kind woman with gentle eyes who helped me understand I wasn't the villain in this story. She showed me that I grew up in a dysfunctional family system built on a foundation of secrecy, and that I didn't create the poison. I just finally, bravely exposed it. In our weekly sessions, I learned to actually listen to my own feelings and trust my own reality, something that had been systematically trained out of me since I was a child. I learned that my desperation for the truth wasn't revenge. It was a healthy person's reaction to an unhealthy environment. Slowly, painstakingly, I started to rebuild. I leaned hard on the two friends who stuck by me, who had seen the cracks in my family for years. They listened without judgment, brought me groceries when I couldn't get out of bed, and reminded me that I wasn't worthless. They became my real family. They showed up for quiet movie nights when the loneliness was too much, and they sat with me on my first Christmas completely alone, making a new tradition of Chinese food and bad holiday films. I started to learn that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up for you. It's about who loves you for your truth, not in spite of it. I took all the wasted energy I used to spend begging for my family's approval and I poured it back into myself. I went back to school and got a professional certification in graphic design, something I had always dreamed of but never pursued. I started painting again, a hobby I'd abandoned as a teenager because my parents called it messy and unproductive. I filled canvases with color, with anger, with sadness, and eventually with hope. I was finding my own voice, not the quiet, apologetic one I used at home, but a strong, confident one. I was finally becoming the person I was always supposed to be, outside the suffocating shadow of their lies. About a year ago, my aunt, my mother's sister, reached out to me. Her number popped up on my phone and my heart nearly stopped. He told me things at home were not good. David, she said, was struggling badly with his identity and was in intensive therapy. His relationship with our parents was full of anger and strain. My father's health, she mentioned pointedly, had taken a significant turn for the worse because of all the stress. She said my mother cries all the time, telling anyone who will listen that she just wants her daughter back, wondering if I'll ever forgive them. Then she asked the question I had both dreaded and longed to hear for years. Will you consider coming home? For their sake. I listened to her whole story, and for the first time, I didn't feel that familiar pang of anger or the deep well of sadness. I just felt a quiet, solid strength inside me. I told her I had already forgiven them, not for them but for me. I had to let go of the bitterness that was poisoning my new life. But forgiveness and reconciliation are two very different things. Going back to that house would mean stepping back into the role of the problem, back to being the person I was. I couldn't do it. I had already built a new home for myself, a life founded on honesty, mutual respect, and peace. Blowing up my family's deepest secret cost me everything I thought I wanted. It cost me my parents, my brother, and the only home I'd ever known. But in return it gave me back the one thing I actually needed: myself. I am no longer the black sheep, the scapegoat, or the problem child. I'm just me. And for the first time in my entire life, that feels like more than enough. The silence from them is still there, a permanent fixture in the background of my life, but my life itself isn't silent anymore. It's full of real connection, genuine laughter, and the kind of unshakable peace that only comes from living in your truth. And that's a legacy I'm proud to build all on my own. Have you ever had to deal with a toxic family dynamic or expose a difficult truth that changed everything? I'd be honored if you would share your story in the comments below. And while you're down there, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. It's so important to know we're not alone. See you on the next video. My sister mocked my job, so her boss fired her instantly. For 20 years my sister told me I was worthless. She insisted my job was a pathetic joke and that I'd never get anywhere meaningful in life. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly comprehend, is that my little joke of a job had secretly made me the co-founder and chief architect of an $80 million company. And as she sat across from me in a sleek, glass-walled office, brimming with confidence as she interviewed for her absolute dream job, I was about to deliver a punchline she never ever saw coming. She thought she was about to meet her new boss, a powerful figure in the tech world she was so desperate to impress. She had no idea her new boss was the very person whose life she'd made a living hell for 2 decades. For as long as I can remember, my sister Vivian was the family's dazzling star, and I was just the quiet, awkward shadow she cast. She was loud, perpetually popular, and thrived in the spotlight. I was the bookish, introverted one, far happier with a computer screen than a crowd. Our parents amplified this difference. They'd praise her for being so outgoing, for having so many friends, and then turn to me with worried expressions, constantly questioning why I was so reserved. Vivian absolutely fed on this validation. To her, my quietness wasn't a personality trait. It was a fundamental weakness, a flaw she could poke and prod for her own amusement. Family dinners were her personal stage. I remember one Thanksgiving vividly. I was a freshman in college, excited about a complex algorithm I'd finally cracked. As I tried to explain it, she let out an exaggerated sigh. "Still tinkering with those little computer projects?" she asked, her voice dripping with a mix of pity and condescension. "That's cute. I just landed a winter internship at Deloitte. You know, a real firm." She'd then spend the next hour loudly recounting stories about her networking and the synergy in her department, all while shooting me looks that said, "See? This is how you succeed." The mockery was a constant, grinding presence in my life. When I declared my major in computer science, she dubbed it the Nerd Factory, and told our parents I was intentionally choosing a path with no social skills. When I landed my first job as a junior coder at a small software firm, she laughed in my face. "So you get paid to stare at a screen all day in a dark room? How thrilling. Try not to forget what sunlight feels like." Every holiday, every family get-together, she found a new and inventive way to paint my life as a sad, pathetic failure. Her favorite line, the one she repeated like a mantra, was, "You're just too quiet. You'll never get anywhere in a world where you have to speak up for yourself." Her words were like 1,000 tiny cuts, and over time they left deep scars. For a long while I actually started to believe her. Maybe I really was doomed to be the quiet, unsuccessful sibling. I retreated further into my work, not just because I loved the logic and the challenge of it, but because my computer was the only place I could get away from her relentless judgment. Honestly, the steady, predictable hum of a server was kinder and more comforting than my own sister's voice. But a small, defiant part of me refused to break. It took her mockery and began to use it as fuel. Every time she told me I'd fail, every time she scoffed at my passion, I promised myself I would prove her wrong. Not for her but for me. I would build a world so successful she couldn't even comprehend it. So while Vivian was busy meticulously climbing her little corporate ladder and broadcasting every tiny promotion like a national holiday, I was building an empire in absolute silence. It all started in a dusty, cramped garage with my best friend from college, Mark. We had an idea that we believed was revolutionary. A platform to streamline massive amounts of data for huge corporations, making it faster, more secure, and far more intuitive than anything else on the market. We called our fledgling project Dataloom. Those first few years were a grueling, exhausting blur of instant coffee, complex code, and the desperate hope that we weren't making a colossal mistake. We poured every cent we had, and a lot we didn't, into the project. I'd work my 9-to-5 day job, come home, and then code until 3 or 4 in the morning on Dataloom. I became a ghost at family functions. I missed birthdays, holidays, and more sleep than I can possibly count. When my parents asked why I was so busy and looked so tired, I'd just mumble something vague about working on a side project. Vivian, of course, would seize the opportunity. "Another one of your little computer games?" she'd sneer across the dinner table. "You're going to burn yourself out for nothing." I never corrected her. I just let her believe I was wasting my time. Her ignorance was my shield, the perfect camouflage for my ambition. Our big break came after 3 years of nonstop grinding. A major tech incubator in Silicon Valley saw a demo of our platform. They understood our vision. After a week of terrifyingly high-stakes meetings, they invested. Suddenly, our garage startup had an actual office, a small but brilliant team, and the resources to scale. From there, our growth was exponential. We landed our first major client, a logistics company that was drowning in data. Then a financial firm, then a healthcare provider. The little project Vivian mocked was rapidly becoming a major disruptive force in the tech industry. Mark, with his natural charisma, became the face of the company, the CEO who handled the press, the investors, and the big meetings. I was the architect behind the scenes, the chief technology officer, the one making sure the entire complex engine ran perfectly. I much preferred it that way. No spotlight, no applause. Just the quiet, profound satisfaction of building something meaningful from nothing. By the time I turned 30, Dataloom was a name whispered with respect in Silicon Valley. We had over 200 employees, offices in 3 cities, and a valuation that had just crossed the $80 million mark. I was a multimillionaire on paper, but my lifestyle was completely unchanged. I drove the same 10-year-old sedan, lived in a simple 2-bedroom apartment, and wore hoodies and jeans to work. I kept my success a total secret from my family. I told myself it was to avoid the drama, the sudden, awkward requests for money, the weird shift in how everyone would treat me. But if I'm being brutally honest with myself, I just wasn't ready to share my win with the one person who was so profoundly certain I was going to lose. The universe, it turns out, has a pretty twisted sense of humor. One unremarkable Tuesday morning, I was in my office, sipping coffee and reviewing a short list of candidates for a senior budget analyst position. This was a crucial role for us. The person would have deep access to our company's financials, helping to forecast our next 5 years of growth and expansion. I'm scanning the polished, professional PDFs, and one name makes me stop cold. Vivian Thorne. My sister. I swear the air left my lungs in a single, silent gasp. For a full 10 seconds I thought it had to be a prank, a bizarre joke from Mark. But there it was, her perfectly curated resume, detailing all of her achievements at the accounting firm she was so proud of. The cover letter was even more surreal. It was stuffed with corporate buzzwords, praising DataLoom's innovative market disruption and visionary leadership. She had absolutely no idea. She was passionately applying to the company that was built on the foundation of the worthless projects she'd been mocking for my entire adult life. My first instinctual thought: pure, unadulterated, petty revenge. Just drag her resume file into the digital trash bin. It would be so easy. She'd get a generic automated rejection email in a few weeks and never, ever know how close she came. But where's the justice in that? She wouldn't learn a single thing. She'd just keep on being her smug, superior self, completely clueless about the cosmic joke that had just played out on my computer screen. But then, a different, far more interesting idea began to form. A cold, quiet, and perfectly clear plan. I wasn't going to deny her the opportunity. I was going to do the exact opposite. I forwarded her resume to our head of HR with a simple, detached note. She looks promising. Let's move her through the standard process. If she makes it to the final round, I want to handle the interview myself. Over the next 2 weeks, I received the updates like dispatches from a battlefield I was secretly commanding. Vivian passed the initial phone screen with flying colors. She aced the difficult technical assessment, impressing the finance team. She absolutely charmed the hiring manager in her second-round video interview. With every hurdle she cleared, this cold, calm feeling of destiny settled over me. She was so close to getting everything she'd ever wanted. A high-paying, prestigious job at a top-tier tech company. She was about to step into the lion's den, thinking she was the lion tamer, never once suspecting that the lion was her own sister. The day of the final interview arrived. The weather was gray and overcast, but I felt a strange sense of clarity. I was in my office. The big corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. My assistant buzzed me on the intercom. Vivian Thorne is here for her 3 p.m. appointment. I took a slow, deep breath. Thank you, Chloe. Send her in. Then I did something a little dramatic, something I felt the moment called for. I swiveled my large leather chair to face the window, turning my back completely to the door, presenting her with only the imposing silhouette of the person in charge. I heard the door open and the soft, respectful click of it closing. The scent of her expensive perfume faintly hit the air. You can have a seat, I said, keeping my voice calm, even and devoid of any recognition, my gaze still fixed on the skyline. I heard the rustle of her jacket and the soft sigh of the cushion as she sat in the chair across from my massive oak desk. I let the silence hang in the air for a solid 10 seconds, feeling the weight of 20 years of history contained in that single quiet moment. It was the first time in our entire lives I had held all the power. Then slowly, deliberately I turned my chair around. The look on Vivian's face was a masterpiece of human emotion, a symphony of shock playing out in seconds. First there was polite, professional confusion. Then a flicker of disbelief, her brain trying to reconcile the person in the chair with the sister she knew. Then as recognition finally landed, her face went through pure, unfiltered shock. Her mouth fell open but no words came out. Her carefully constructed mask of corporate confidence didn't just crack. It shattered into a million pieces. Hello, Vivian, I said, allowing a faint, unreadable smile to touch my lips. Fancy seeing you here. She just stared, her face ghostly pale. She looked from me to the nameplate on my desk, then back to my face. What are you doing here? She stammered, her voice a reedy whisper. She looked around my huge office, at the modern art on the walls, the stunning view, as if she were trapped in a bizarre hallucination. I work here, I said simply, letting the words land. This is my company. Well, half of it anyway. I picked up her resume from my desk, holding it but not looking at it. So, I said, my tone shifting instantly, becoming formal and professional, the voice of a CTO vetting a candidate. It says here you're an expert in budget analysis and financial forecasting. Tell me, why do you want to work at DataLoom? She was completely and utterly rattled, but years of corporate training kicked into autopilot. She tried to answer, stumbling through some rehearsed hollow speech about synergy and growth potential, but her eyes kept darting around the room, unable to focus. She couldn't connect the dots between the quiet, worthless little sister she'd spent a lifetime mocking and the composed, successful woman sitting in the seat of power in front of her. I let her ramble for another minute before holding up a hand to gently stop her. It's funny, I said, leaning forward on my desk, my voice softening just a little. You remind me of my sister. She also had a lot of strong opinions about my career choices. She called my work a joke. A little game. She told me I'd never get anywhere, because I was too quiet. The blood completely drained from her face. Her breathing became shallow. She knew exactly what was happening. The thing is, Vivian, I continued, my voice losing all its warmth and turning as cold and hard as steel, we have a very specific culture here at DataLoom. We value humility. We value respect. We value people who build others up, not tear them down to make themselves feel bigger. Your resume is impressive, I'll give you that. But I've had the distinct pleasure of reviewing your character for the last 20 years. And based on that long-term performance review, you're not a good fit for this company. I stood up, the chair gliding back silently, a clear signal that we were done. Thank you for your time. This interview is over. My assistant will validate your parking on the way out. And just like that, the person who spent years trying to systematically destroy my confidence was left speechless, her lifelong arrogance dismantled in the one place she saw as her ultimate prize. The karma she had earned over 2 decades was delivered not with a shout, but with the quiet, devastating finality of a closed door. Have you ever had a moment of perfect karma? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy stories where the underdog finally wins, make sure to like and subscribe for more. Vivian didn't say a single word. There were no arguments, no pleas. She just stood up mechanically, her face a blank mask of humiliation, grabbed her purse and walked out of my office without making eye contact. I stood by my window and watched through the glass walls as she walked like a zombie through the busy, vibrant workspace of the company I built. The dozens of employees she hoped would be her future colleagues, programmers, designers, analysts, didn't even look up from their work. To them, she was just another rejected candidate, and for the first time in her life in a room full of people, she was completely and utterly invisible. An hour later, my phone rang. It was my mom. "What did you do to your sister?" she demanded, her voice frantic and accusatory. She came home in absolute hysterics. She said you humiliated her, that you set her up and sabotaged her dream job. How could you be so cruel? For years, hearing that tone from my mother would have made me crumble. I would have been the one to apologize, to smooth things over, to take the blame just to keep the peace. But not anymore. Calmly, methodically, I walked my mom through the last 2 decades. I reminded her of every snide comment at Christmas, every condescending question on birthdays, every single time Vivian went out of her way to make me feel small and worthless, all while my parents just watched. "I didn't sabotage anything, Mom," I said, my voice firm but not angry. "I let her be judged on her merits by my team and she passed. Then she was judged by me on her character. I just held up a mirror and she didn't like the reflection." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the phone, a silence that stretched for years. For the first time, my parents were forced to confront the toxic dynamic they had enabled and even encouraged for so long. The family balance is now permanently broken. Dinners are quieter, unbearably awkward. Vivian barely speaks to me. She found another accounting job eventually, but her smug superiority is gone, replaced by a brittle, sullen resentment. She knows, and my family knows, that the quiet one she pitied was more successful than she ever dreamed of being. As for me, I finally feel free. I didn't get her fired for revenge. I did it because she genuinely wasn't qualified for the culture we built. Not in skill but in character. My success isn't a secret anymore, and the heavy weight of keeping it hidden is finally gone. I proved to myself that my worth was never determined by the volume of my voice, but by the quiet dedication to my work. And every morning when I walk into the office of the company they said I could never build, I remember that the best response to those who mock you is to build a life so successful they have to apply for a job in it. Hit that subscribe button, share, like, and we see you on our next video. My in-laws killed my dog, so I sued them for $10,000. My in-laws killed my dog. And when I sued them for $10,000, they had the nerve to look our friends and family in the eye and tell everyone that I was the greedy, heartless one. They truly believed the law was on their side. That my best friend, my constant companion, was legally no different than a piece of furniture. They thought they could get away with it. They thought the truth would stay buried 6 feet under, right along with him. They never imagined I would find a way to make a court of law see what they had done. They never expected the judge to hear the one thing they fought so desperately to keep hidden. This isn't just a story about the grief of losing a pet. It's a story about betrayal, about the cold-bloodedness that can hide behind a polite smile. It's about what happens when you are pushed to the absolute edge, when your world is burned to the ground, and the only thing left to do is rise from the ashes and fight back with everything you have. His name was Barnaby. Even saying his name now brings back the exact feeling of his fur under my hand. He was this goofy, slightly oversized golden retriever with one ear that always flopped over at a comical angle and a tail that was basically a perpetual motion machine, capable of clearing a coffee table with a single happy wag. To say he was just a pet is the greatest understatement of my life. He was my rock. My shadow. He was the warm, heavy weight on my feet that kept me grounded during long, stressful days working from home. He was the world's most enthusiastic, mud-loving hiking partner, always forging ahead on the trail but constantly looking back to make sure I was still there. And he was the big, furry confidant who'd rest his heavy head on my lap when he just knew I was sad, absorbing my tears into his coat without a single word needed. He saw me through a major career change, a cross-country move, and the death of my mother. He was, in every sense of the word, family. When I married my husband Mark, he knew it was a package deal. You get me, you get Barnaby. Mark thankfully adored him. He loved the way Barnaby would greet him at the door as if he'd just returned from a decade-long war. But his parents, my in-laws, that was a different story entirely. On the surface they were polite enough. They were masters of that kind of brittle, paper-thin civility. When they'd come to our house, they'd give Barnaby a stiff, hesitant little pat on the head and say something like, "Oh, what a lovely animal," with the same enthusiasm you might use for a well-behaved zoo creature. But I saw the looks that flickered across their faces when they thought I wasn't watching. The way they'd flinch almost imperceptibly when he'd trot over for a friendly sniff, as if he were covered in filth. I saw the way my mother-in-law Helen would pointedly and performatively brush invisible dog hair off the couch, her face a perfect mask of quiet disgust. Their home was a sterile museum of beige carpets and glass curios. Ours was a lived-in space, complete with fur tumbleweeds and the occasional muddy paw print. To them our home was a mess and Barnaby was the cause. They'd make these little jokes, that weren't jokes at all, just passive-aggressive jabs wrapped in a chuckle. "I swear she loves this dog more than you," my father-in-law David would say to Mark, but the laugh never ever reached his cold eyes. Or Helen would let out a long theatrical sigh and say, "Must be nice having a dog to dote on instead of thinking about giving us grandchildren." It was a constant low-grade hum of disapproval. To them Barnaby wasn't a dog. He was a rival for my affection. He was this furry four-legged symbol of a life I was living that they just didn't get, or more accurately didn't approve of. He represented my choice to prioritize my career, to wait on having kids, to build a life on my own terms. I tried to brush it off, to tell myself I was being too sensitive, that this was just how they were. But there was a coldness there, a deep-seated resentment that was always simmering just under the surface, waiting for a chance to boil over. The call came on a Saturday afternoon in late September. The air was just starting to get that crisp autumn edge. My husband and I were out of town for a friend's wedding, the first real trip we'd taken in years, a chance to just be a couple and forget about work and responsibilities. We'd asked my in-laws to watch Barnaby. In my mind it wasn't just a practical request, it was an olive branch. A way of saying, he's part of our family and you are too. Let's try to bridge this gap. They agreed, almost a little too eagerly in retrospect. "Of course, dear," Helen had said. "We'd be delighted. You two go have fun." My mother-in-law was on the phone, her voice a shrill, theatrical wail that immediately sent a spike of ice water through my veins. It wasn't the sound of genuine grief. It was a performance. There'd been an accident, she cried between dramatic, gulping sobs. Barnaby got out. The gate was left open. He ran into the street. She was so sorry. The world just stopped. I remember the bizarre, surreal sensation of hearing the muffled sound of a Kool and the Gang song from the wedding reception down the hall, and then absolute crushing silence in my own head. My husband took the phone, his face draining of all color. I just collapsed onto the stiff hotel bedspread, my mind a total, merciful blank. We drove the 5 hours back the next day in near total silence, the unspoken questions hanging in the air between us like a thick fog. By the time we got to their house they had already had him cremated. "We didn't want you to have to see him like that," David said, his expression carefully arranged into one of solemn sympathy. They handed me a generic, soulless little wooden box. It was shockingly light. There was no vet report. No bill from an animal hospital. No collar. Just a box. And a story that felt completely, fundamentally wrong, like a badly rehearsed lie. A few days later, a sympathy card arrived from our local vet clinic. It's standard practice, I know, a kind gesture. But inside, beneath the printed condolences, there was a handwritten note from Dr. Evans, the vet who'd known Barnaby since he was a clumsy 8-week-old puppy. It said, "I'm so sorry for your loss. Please know we did everything we could." The words felt strange. We did everything we could? The story was that he died instantly. My hands were shaking as I dialed the clinic's number. I asked to speak with her. I asked her what she meant. She hesitated, the professional caution in her voice battling with a clear sense of human decency. "I'm not sure what his parents told you," she began slowly, "but Barnaby did not die on impact. They brought him in, but his injuries, they didn't align with a typical vehicle accident." The dam of professional silence broke. She told me, Barnaby hadn't just been hit by a car. He had signs of severe, repeated blunt force trauma to his head and torso. Someone had hurt him. Brutally. And worse, she said, based on his condition they had waited hours, to bring him in. By the time he got to her, it was far, far too late to save his life. The world didn't just stop this time. It shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. The neat, convenient story they had built for us didn't just fall apart. It revealed something monstrous and unthinkable underneath. The image of them waiting, listening to him suffer, while they decided what to do, what lie to tell, is something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. We drove to their house immediately. We didn't even call. My husband, his face ashen and set like stone, held the vet's notes, which we'd gone to pick up a printed copy of. We didn't want a fight. We didn't want screaming or accusations. We just wanted the truth. We needed, for our own sanity, to hear them say it. They denied everything. Vehemently. They doubled down, shifting from feigned sympathy to outright indignation. They called me hysterical. Lies became more and more elaborate. And then my father-in-law, David, did the thing that tipped the world on its axis. He looked right at me, his eyes as cold and dead as a winter sky, and said, "For God's sake, it was just a dog. Just a dog." 7 words. 7 words to erase a life. 7 words to dismiss years of love, companionship, and unwavering loyalty. 7 words that told me my grief was invalid, my love was foolish, and his life was worthless. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The profound, suffocating grief that had been crushing me for days instantly transmuted into white-hot rage. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was fighting. The decision to sue them was never about the money. Not for a second. It was about forcing them to stand in a public forum in front of a judge and have their lies exposed. It was about making them understand that his life mattered. It was the only voice I had left to speak for him. The first lawyer I spoke to, a woman with kind eyes but a weary voice, laid out the brutal truth of the system, something every devastated pet owner who seeks justice needs to hear. "In the eyes of the law," she said gently but firmly, "your dog is considered personal property. Legally, he has the same standing as a television or a toaster." My heart, already broken, just sank to the floor. Felt like a second death. A toaster doesn't greet you at the door. A TV doesn't lick your tears away. She explained that in most states, including ours, when you sue for the death of a pet, you can typically only recover the fair market value. Basically what it would cost to buy a replacement, plus any vet bills you incurred. The cold, hard, economic logic of the law has no place for a broken heart, for the gaping hole a companion leaves behind. She told me that getting any damages for emotional distress or loss of companionship was an incredible long shot, something courts almost never award in these cases. "The system," she said with a sigh, "is about 100 years behind our hearts when it comes to animals." But she also offered a glimmer of hope. She mentioned that the legal landscape is, ever so slowly, starting to change. My lawyer pointed to a few pioneering states like Tennessee, which have passed specific statutes allowing for non-economic damages for the loss of a companion animal. She was clear. She warned me that since we were in a different state, we couldn't rely on that precedent directly, but we could use the spirit of it to appeal to the judge's fundamental humanity. So why $10,000? It wasn't a number we ever expected to actually get. It was a statement. It was a symbol. We calculated the cost of a purebred golden retriever puppy from a reputable breeder. We added in the thousands in vet bills from the pointless last-ditch attempt to save his life. We added the cost of his cremation. And then we added a significant demand for punitive damages, a legal fine designed specifically to punish wrongdoers for malicious or fraudulent conduct. The number was meant to be a headline. It was meant to say, his life wasn't worthless. His absence has created a $10,000 hole in our lives. You don't get to just walk away. The moment my in-laws were served with the lawsuit, the thin veil of civility was ripped away and it became all-out war. They refused to even consider settling out of court for a smaller amount. Pride and arrogance wouldn't let them. They hired a shark of a lawyer, the kind you see in movies, who immediately started sending these intimidating, jargon-filled letters designed to scare us into dropping the suit. Then came the smear campaign, and it was more painful than any legal threat. Suddenly, to the rest of the family and their social circle, I was the villain. I was greedy. I was unhinged. I was trying to extort my own dear in-laws over a dead animal. People we'd known for years, people who had been at our wedding, suddenly stopped talking to us. Phone calls went unanswered. We were uninvited from family gatherings. The family split right down the middle, a deep, ugly fracture that will likely never heal. The depositions were a unique form of psychological torture. Their lawyer grilled me for hours in a soulless conference room, his questions dripping with insinuation. He tried to paint me as an obsessive, unstable pet owner who was projecting her issues onto the dog. Then it was their turn. Under oath, they stuck to their story. It was a tragic accident. He darted into the road. They were devastated. But the more they talked, the more their carefully constructed narrative began to fray at the edges. Their timelines didn't match up with each other's. Their description of the car that supposedly hit him was impossibly vague. It was dark, my mother-in-law said. It happened so fast, my father-in-law added. They were lying, and frankly they were terrible at it. Watching them squirm, seeing their eyes shift and their hands tremble, only hardened my resolve. Our day in court finally came months later. It was small claims court, which meant no jury. Just us, them, and a judge who looked tired and overworked before we even started. The room was small, sterile, and suffocatingly quiet. My in-laws sat at the opposite table, refusing to even look at me. My lawyer was brilliant. She was calm, methodical, and relentless. She laid out the timeline of events from the moment we left them with Barnaby to the moment they finally, belatedly, took him to the vet. She presented Dr. Evans's testimony and the official report detailing the nature of his injuries. Injuries inconsistent with their story. And then she brought out our secret weapon, the text messages. She put up on a screen for the judge to see dozens and dozens of texts my mother-in-law had sent my husband in the months leading up to Barnaby's death. Complaints about his barking. Complaints about the dog smell in our house. Bitter little remarks about the amount of attention I gave him. Their own words, in black and white, established a clear pattern of animosity. They showed motive. They showed malice. Then it was my turn to speak. My lawyer asked me just one simple question. Can you tell the court about Barnaby? And I did. I didn't talk about fair market value or legal standing or property. I talked about how he would wait by the front window for me every single day, and how his whole body would convulse with joy the moment my car pulled into the driveway. I talked about the time my mom died and I was sobbing on the kitchen floor and he came over and just laid down next to me, licking the tears off my face for almost an hour. I looked at the judge, a man I'd never met, and said through my own tears, he wasn't property. He was my family. And they took him from me. They lied about it and they called him worthless. When my in-laws took the stand, their story completely imploded under my lawyer's precise cross-examination. She poked hole after hole in their timeline. She questioned why they didn't call us immediately. She asked why they had him cremated so quickly before we could even say goodbye. They contradicted each other. They became flustered and angry. The judge just listened, his face giving absolutely nothing away. The judge leaned back in his large leather chair and the room was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. He started by saying, the law in this state is clear. An animal, by legal definition, is personal property. My heart hit the floor with a thud. I felt the air leave my lungs. He went on. For that reason I cannot award damages for emotional distress or loss of companionship, as much as I may personally sympathize. I felt my husband's hand grip mine tightly. This is it, I thought. We lost. After all this they win. However, the judge said, and his eyes shifted, locking directly onto my in-laws, I find the defendant's testimony to be inconsistent, evasive, and ultimately not credible. He said that based on the veterinary He awarded me the full cost of the emergency vet bills. He awarded the full cost of the cremation. He cited the state average for a purebred golden retriever puppy and awarded me his full replacement value. Then he looked dead at my in-laws, his expression one of pure contempt. He said that because their actions were not merely accidental but malicious and intentional, and because they then lied about it under oath, he was also awarding significant punitive damages to punish them for their conduct and deter others from such behavior. The total came to $4,800. It wasn't the $10,000 we had asked for. But it wasn't zero. It was a judgment. They were being held accountable financially and publicly. Section 8. The Aftermath and Reflection. As the judge banged his gavel, bringing the proceedings to a close, he said one more thing, looking right at me with a softness that wasn't there before. Ma'am, he said, while the law may call him property, I understand that you lost a member of your family. My ruling is based on the law as it stands today, not perhaps as it should be. In that moment, with that small but profound acknowledgement, I finally cried. Not tears of rage or grief, but of relief. That was the real victory. The money didn't matter. It was never about the money. What mattered was that an officer of the court had called them liars and made them pay for their cruelty. Their reputation in their community and within the fractured remains of our family was destroyed. We are, of course, no longer in contact and the family is broken in a way that can never be repaired. But I don't regret it. I fought for Barnaby. I made sure his life, his love, and his memory weren't just dismissed with 3 callous words. The law is slow and it's imperfect and it's cold. But for one day in one small courtroom we made it listen. For one day my dog wasn't just a toaster. His life mattered. This whole nightmare taught me that fighting for our pets in the legal system is an incredibly difficult, uphill battle. You have to be prepared for a system that sees your family member as an object. But it's a fight worth having. If there's a pet who changed your life who was more than just an animal to you, I would be honored to hear about them. Tell me their name in the comments below. Let's fill this space with their memory. And if you believe the law should catch up to our hearts,
You won't believe what this family did to her. Smoke curled through the air like whispers from hell. Emily's eyes snapped open to the crackling sound of fire. The walls of her room glowed red, the posters above her bed curling and blackening in the heat. She coughed violently, crawling toward the door, but when she grabbed the handle, the metal scorched her palm. She screamed, "Help! Dad! Somebody help me!" No answer, only the hungry roar of flames. Then, through the blur of smoke, she saw it. Under the door, the faint outline of footsteps. 3 pairs. And laughter. Female laughter. Her blood froze. Sia, Lily, and their mother. They were standing there, on the other side, watching. "Please," Emily cried, banging the door. "Let me out!" Silence. Then Sia's voice, cold and sharp. "You should have never been born." The flames exploded behind her, and Emily did the only thing she could. She ran toward the window, smashed it with a chair, and leapt out into the night. The house behind her burned like a funeral pyre, lighting up the sky. That night, Emily Johnson died in the fire. But from her ashes, someone new was born. A survivor, a writer, a woman destined to make the whole world remember her name. Years before that night, Emily's world had been made of sunlight and laughter. Their small Los Angeles home smelled of her mother's perfume, jasmine and something sweet. Her mother, Rose, had the softest hands, and her laugh filled the walls like music. Her father, Mark, was strong but gentle, a man whose smile could make the hardest day fade. He was a proud African immigrant, working as an architect and saving for Emily's future. "Daddy, do you love Mommy more than me?" Emily once asked while he tucked her into bed. Mark chuckled. "That's a dangerous question, Princess. Answer it." "I love you both differently," he said. "But you're my heart." Emily grinned, not knowing that one day that same heart would break beyond repair. It started with a cough. Then came the weakness, the hospital visits, the medicine bottles lining the kitchen counter like soldiers. Rose tried to stay strong. She smiled even when the pain twisted her body. "Don't cry, Emmy," she whispered one night. "God doesn't take love away. He just changes where it lives." Emily didn't understand then. The next morning, her father sat by her bed, eyes hollow. The world outside was gray. "Daddy," she whispered. He didn't answer. He just held her, and she knew. Her mother was gone. Rain fell during the funeral. The sound of the priest's voice blurred with thunder. Emily stood between headstones, clutching her father's sleeve. Her shoes were soaked, her heart too heavy to beat. That day, the laughter left their home. Mark changed after Rose's death. He became quiet, lost in his work, leaving early, returning late. The house turned into a museum of memories. Photos of Rose everywhere, dust gathering on furniture she once cleaned. Relatives tried to help. "Mark, you can't raise a girl alone," they said. "You need someone." But he always refused. "I promised Rose I'd protect Emily. No woman will come between us." He meant it. For 5 long years, it was just father and daughter. Mark tried, cooking breakfast, braiding her hair, badly, attending school events. They weren't perfect, but they had each other. Until one night, Emily looked at him and saw not the father she adored, but a lonely man trapped in his grief. "Daddy," she said softly, "don't you ever get tired of being alone?" He smiled faintly. "I have you. But I want you to be happy," she said. "I want a mother again." Mark hesitated. For the first time in years, he let the idea in. Her name was Diana Carter. She was beautiful, too beautiful. Golden hair, blue eyes, a smile that seemed gentle but sharp. She was a single mother with 2 teenage daughters, CIA and Lily. They met at church. Diana volunteered at charity events, always smiling, always polite. She seemed kind, and for a while she was. Emily tried. She called her Mom. She helped around the house, laughed with her stepsisters. For a few months, it felt like a real family. Then came the cracks. It began subtly, Diana asking Emily to help out more since you're older, while Sia and Lily relaxed on the couch. Emily, do the dishes. Emily, clean the bathroom. Emily, could you iron my dress for me? Mark thought nothing of it. She's teaching you responsibility, he said. But Emily felt it. The shift, the chill, the way her stepmother's smile no longer reached her eyes. CIA, the oldest, was cruel in quiet ways. She would borrow Emily's things and never return them. She'd whisper racist jokes at dinner, hidden behind laughter. Lily was worse, sneaky, jealous, a mirror of her mother's spite. Soon, Emily wasn't part of the family anymore. She was the help. He looked down, unable to meet her eyes. From the hallway, a loud crash shattered the tension. A vase broken. Then a slurred voice, angry, bitter. Who the hell is at the door? Emily turned. Saye. Her once beautiful stepsister stumbled into view, eyes red, her hair messy. The smell of alcohol clung to her like perfume. When she saw Emily, she froze, then laughed a dry, hollow laugh. Well, well, look who decided to show up. The black trash turned superstar, Mark shouted. Sia, enough. But Emily raised a hand, calm. Let her speak. Sia sneered. What, you came back to gloat? To show off your perfect life while we're rotting here? Emily's tone was soft but sharp. No, Sia. I came to see what happens when cruelty finally eats itself. The room fell silent. Even the rain outside seemed to pause. Behind Sia, another figure appeared. A little girl, maybe 6, clutching a worn-out teddy bear. Her hair was tangled, her eyes hollow. Emily's breath caught. Who is she? Mark answered quietly, shame weighing his words. She's your stepmother's granddaughter. Sia's niece. Her mother, Lily, left her here after she was arrested. Emily froze. Arrested? Mark nodded slowly. She killed her boyfriend. Drugs, rage, I don't know anymore. The silence that followed was heavy, not with anger this time, but with sorrow, the kind that comes after truth finally explodes. Emily looked at the child again, a small, innocent echo of all the suffering adults had created. She crouched, meeting the girl's eyes. Hey there, she whispered gently. What's your name? Anna, the child murmured. Emily smiled faintly. That's a beautiful name. The little girl blinked. Are you an angel? Emily's heart cracked. No, sweetheart. Just someone who knows what it feels like to be forgotten. Later that evening, Emily sat alone in her old room, the one rebuilt after the fire. The walls were bare, but she could still smell the faint trace of ashes beneath the new paint. Leo found her there, sitting by the window, staring at the empty backyard. Are you okay? He asked softly. I thought I'd feel triumphant, she said. Seeing them broken, seeing karma work. But all I feel is sad. Leo placed a hand on her shoulder. That's because you've grown. Revenge was never your story. Resurrection was. She smiled at that, leaning into his warmth. You know, he added playfully, it's not too late to change your ending again. Emily turned to him, eyebrow raised. Change it how? He stood, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a small velvet box. When he opened it, the room seemed to shrink, all her past fading into the glow of a single diamond. Emily Johnson, he said softly, his voice trembling but sure. You walked through fire, through loss, through every reason to stop believing in love. And still, you chose light. Would you do me the honor of being my wife? Her breath caught. In her mind, she saw flashes, her mother's smile, her childhood laughter, the flames, the tears, the scripts, the success. Every scar, every word, every night spent crying into pages that would one day change her life. And now this. Yes, she whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. 1,000 times yes. Leo slipped the ring on her finger, and outside the rain finally stopped. Weeks later, the world woke to headlines that read, Hollywood writer marries British royal, from orphan to princess. Photographers swarmed the palace gates, hungry for shots of the girl who had rewritten her destiny. But Emily wasn't thinking about fame. As she stood on the balcony overlooking the gardens of Oxfordshire, she thought only of one thing, her mother. "Mom," she whispered to the wind, "I made it. I finally came home." A soft breeze swept across her face, warm and sweet, like a blessing. And for the first time in her life, Emily didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was living. Years later, a little book would appear on bestseller lists around the world. Ashes of a Girl, the Emily Johnson story. It opened with one simple line. "They tried to burn me, but I learned to write in fire." And with that, Emily's story, the girl who turned pain into power, became immortal. Days became weeks, weeks became months. Emily worked double shifts at the diner, wiping counters by day and writing by night. Her fingertips were always sticky with coffee and ink. Sometimes she'd look at the Hollywood sign from the bus window and whisper, "One day." Every night before bed, she'd email one more studio, one more producer, one more hope. Most never replied. Some replied with one word, pass. Yet she never stopped. One night while mopping the diner floor, her manager called out, "You've got mail, kid." It was a small envelope addressed in elegant handwriting. Inside was a letter from a small indie producer named Maya Brooks. "Your script spoke to me. I don't have a studio budget, but I'd love to develop it with you." Let's Meet Emily pressed the letter to her chest. Her heart beat like it used to when her mother sang. Maya was nothing like the others. Warm, sharp, honest. A black woman in her 40s with silver streaks in her curls and eyes that saw through everything. They met at a cafe in downtown LA. "I read your script 3 times, Maya said, stirring her coffee. "You've got fire in your pen, Emily." "Where did this come from?" Emily hesitated. "My life." Maya nodded slowly, then never stopped writing from there. That meeting turned into a partnership. Together, they polished Ashes of a Broken Girl. Maya introduced Emily to other filmmakers, taught her how to pitch, how to fight for her voice. For the first time, Emily felt seen. Then came the night Maya called, voice trembling with excitement. We're in! Sundance Film Festival wants your script for a short film adaptation." Emily dropped the phone, sinking to her knees. Tears streamed down her face as laughter bubbled through them. All those nights of hunger, the insults, the fire. They hadn't destroyed her. They'd built her. Sundance was snow and magic. Emily had never seen snow before. It felt like the sky was finally soft enough to touch. She wore a borrowed coat, her curls tucked under a wool hat, her name printed on a small plastic badge. When the film screened, she sat at the back of the theater. The audience gasped, laughed, cried, all for her words. At the end, they stood up and clapped. Emily didn't move. She just cried quietly, her hands trembling in her lap. Afterward, a tall man in a scarf approached. "That was your story?" She nodded. "It deserves more than a short film," he said. "I'm with Oxford's screenwriting program. We offer scholarships to exceptional new voices. Ever thought about studying in the UK?" Her jaw dropped. "Me?" He smiled. "You. Think about it." She did more than think. The flight. A year later, Emily stepped off a plane into the grey chill of Oxford, England. The university looked like something out of a dream. Stone walls, endless libraries, whispers of genius in every hallway. She was one of only 3 black students in her department, and she felt it. In classes, professors often said things like, "You're surprisingly articulate," or "Your perspective is unique." But Emily didn't let the sting show. She had learned long ago to smile in the face of condescension. At night, she wrote, always wrote. Her dorm window overlooked a courtyard where autumn leaves fell like pages of unwritten stories. She wrote about women who rose from ashes, about fire and forgiveness, about finding light in darkness. By the time she graduated, she had 3 completed scripts and 1 powerful decision. She was going back to Hollywood, but this time, she wasn't asking for permission. Los Angeles looked different now, or maybe she did. She returned with Oxford polish, a degree that opened doors, and a voice no one could silence anymore. Maya welcomed her back with open arms. "Look at you," she said. Our Oxford star. Together they pitched Ashes of a Broken Girl again. But this time, people listened. Within months, a studio greenlit the full film. Emily was hired not just as the writer, but as an associate producer. She stood on set one morning, watching actors bring her story to life. The girl who had once slept on bus benches now had a chair with her name on it. When the camera rolled, she whispered to herself, "Mom, we made it." The premiere was electric. Flashbulbs exploded. Fans cheered. Reporters shouted her name. Emily wore a sleek black gown and walked the red carpet with Maya at her side. "Emily, how does it feel to see your life on screen?" a reporter asked. Emily smiled. "It feels like healing." The film went on to win multiple awards. Critics called her Hollywood's new voice of truth. But fame, she soon learned, was a different kind of fire. People wanted pieces of her. Interviews, endorsements, meetings. Some praised her. Others tried to remake her again. "Can you tone down the race trauma stuff?" one executive asked. "Audiences want lighter stories now." Emily stared at him for a long time. "My stories are light," she said finally. "They just start in the dark." She walked out and never looked back. Success didn't erase loneliness. Her father never called. The step-family she once had was just a scar she tried not to touch. Sometimes when the cameras were gone and the house was quiet, she wondered if happiness was ever meant to last for her. One evening, she sat by the window, staring at the city lights. Her reflection looked back, older, calmer, but still searching. For the first time in years, she whispered a prayer. "God, if there's more to my story, show me." That night, fate answered. Not with thunder, but with headlights. She was driving home after a late shoot, exhausted, the city streets nearly empty. Then, out of nowhere, two masked men stepped into the road, waving guns. "Out of the car!" one shouted. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She froze, hands shaking. Before she could move, a blur of motion appeared. A tall man, rough clothes, long hair, eyes burning with defiance. He tackled one of the men to the ground, knocked the gun away, and shouted, "Run!" She stumbled back, terrified. Police sirens wailed in the distance. The carjackers fled. When it was over, the stranger turned to her, breathless. "You okay?" Emily nodded weakly. "Who are you?" He smiled, tired but kind. "Just someone who had nowhere else to be." That night would change both their lives. But that Emily didn't know yet. For now, she only knew gratitude and curiosity. Days later, headlines still talked about the attempted carjacking. Emily didn't mention the man who saved her. She didn't even know his name. But his face, those eyes, haunted her thoughts. She found herself scanning sidewalks, corners, bus stops, as if he'd appear again. When he finally did, it wasn't on the street. It was in the alley behind the diner where she used to work. He was sitting there feeding pigeons from a paper bag. Emily froze. "You," she whispered. He looked up and smiled softly. "Me." And that's where her next story would begin. Not about fire or fame, but about love that had nothing to do with status or success. A new kind of miracle was waiting. The night was cool, but Los Angeles still hummed with its usual chaos. Sirens, headlights, and the distant pulse of a city that never learned how to sleep. Emily gripped her steering wheel, exhausted. The day had stretched longer than any she could remember. Meetings, rewrites, a last-minute studio dinner. Her eyelids fluttered. "Just 5 more minutes to home," she whispered to herself. Then, the flash of a shadow. A shape darted in front of her car. She slammed the brakes. Her heart hammered. "What the—" Before she could blink, another shape appeared. 2 men. Their faces masked, their hands gloved. One pounded on her window. "Get out of the car!" Emily froze. The street was dark, empty. She reached for her phone. Too late. The door was yanked open, and rough hands pulled her out. Her knees hit the pavement. One man grabbed her bag. Another aimed something cold and metallic at her face. "Don't look at me," he hissed. She lifted her hands, voice trembling. "Please, take whatever you want." The sound of footsteps broke through the panic. Heavy, fast, determined. Then, like lightning, someone crashed into the attacker from behind. The man's weapon clattered to the ground. Emily heard fists, shouts, pain. One robber ran. The other fell silent. When the chaos cleared, she looked up. A man stood over the fallen thief, breathing hard. His hair was a tangled mess. His clothes were dirty, his face streaked with city dust. But his eyes, piercing, steady, were unlike anything she'd ever seen. He turned to her, voice low. "Are you hurt?" Emily shook her head. "No. You just saved my life." He smiled faintly, as if unused to gratitude. "You should call the police." I I will," she stammered, fumbling with her phone. "What about you?" He stepped back, glancing toward the shadows as sirens wailed in the distance. "I'll be fine." But she reached out, catching his arm before he could disappear. "Wait, what's your name?" He hesitated. "Leo." "Leo," she repeated softly. "Thank you." For a second, something flickered between them, a silent understanding neither could explain. Later that night, after hours of police questions and paperwork, Emily found herself thinking about him, the stranger, the man who had nothing, no home, no phone, no reason to help, and yet had risked everything for her. By the next morning, her curiosity won. She drove back to the same street where it had happened. She didn't expect to see him, but there he was, and was sitting on the curb near a rundown diner, sipping coffee from a paper cup, as if the whole city had forgotten him. Emily parked and walked over. "You again?" Leo looked up, a hint of surprise breaking through his calm. "You found me." "I owed you breakfast," she said, handing him a bag. "Egg sandwich, coffee, and no arguments." He chuckled quietly. "You don't take no easily, do you?" "I'm a writer." "It's a professional hazard." For the first time, she saw him clearly in daylight. His jawline was strong, his gaze intelligent, but there was something guarded in the way he carried himself, a shadow behind every word. "So," she asked, sitting beside him on the curb, "why are you out here?" He shrugged, avoiding her eyes. "Let's just say, I wanted to disappear." "From what?" "From everything that wasn't real." The answer intrigued her. "You sound like a poet." He smiled faintly. "Maybe. Or just someone tired of lies." Emily tilted her head, studying him. "You know, I could use that kind of honesty. Hollywood is allergic to it." "Hollywood?" His brows lifted. She laughed. "You saved the wrong girl, Leo. I'm a writer. I live off rejection letters and reheated coffee." His eyes softened. "You don't look like rejection to me." The words hit her unexpectedly deep. No one had ever said something so gentle to her. Days turned into weeks. They met again, sometimes at that diner, sometimes when she dropped by after work with leftovers. He told her bits of stories, that he'd come from far away, that he'd chosen this life to find truth, not luxury. She told him about her mother, the fire, her battles, her dreams. He listened, always quietly, as though her pain deserved reverence. One evening, as the city lights shimmered below the hills, Leo asked, "Why do you still write?" Emily smiled sadly. "Because if I stop, then they win." "Who?" "Everyone who told me I couldn't. Everyone who tried to silence me." He looked at her for a long time. "Then don't ever stop." There was something magnetic about the way he said it. Not just encouragement, but belief. Real belief. The kind she had begged for her whole life. One night after her first screenplay premiere, Emily invited him to celebrate. "You can't refuse this one," she said, tugging his hand. He hesitated at the entrance of the gala, a place of glass chandeliers and designer suits. His old jeans and faded jacket drew stares, but Emily didn't care. "This is my friend," she told everyone who asked. "The man who saved my life." When the photographers crowded around her, Leo stepped aside, disappearing into the background. Emily noticed and followed him outside. He stood by her car, hands in pockets, staring at the city lights. "You don't belong in there," he said softly. "You belong out here, where people are real." She crossed her arms. "You talk like someone who's been both places." He turned to her slowly. "Maybe I have." The silence between them stretched, thick with something unsaid. Then he asked, almost as if testing her, "If I told you I wasn't who you think I am, would it change anything?" She frowned. "You mean you're not homeless?" His lips curved faintly. "Let's say it's complicated. Leo, everyone's complicated. He studied her face, searching for something. Trust, perhaps. Then he stepped closer, his voice low, almost trembling. Emily, if I asked you to marry me, in this state, with nothing, no money, no house, no name, what would you say? Her breath caught. Leo, she whispered, I'd say yes, 1,000 times yes. For a long moment, he just looked at her, as though he was memorizing every line of her face. Then he smiled, his eyes glistening with something deeper than relief. You have no idea what you just said, he murmured. That night, when he finally told her who he really was, Leonard Alexander, son of the Duke of Oxfordshire, heir to one of England's oldest families, Emily laughed in disbelief, until the news flashed the next morning. Missing English royal heir found in Los Angeles? Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. The studio wanted statements. The tabloids wanted interviews. But Emily turned off her phone. She sat by the window of her small apartment, staring at Leo. No, Prince Leonard, as he paced nervously, explaining everything. How he'd fled the UK to escape the falseness of privilege. How he'd wanted someone to love him without the weight of his name. Emily listened, heart pounding. The irony was sharp. She had spent her whole life fighting to be seen, and he had spent his hiding from being seen. Maybe that was why they fit. The next morning, before the media frenzy could swallow them whole, Leo took her hand. Come with me to England, he said softly. Let me do this right. Emily hesitated, torn between two worlds, the one she had built from ashes and the one that suddenly glittered before her. Leo, I fought too long to stand on my own. Then don't stop standing, he said. Just stand beside me. And with that, the girl who had once jumped from a burning house stepped into a jet that would carry her halfway across the world. Not as a victim, not as a maid, not as a forgotten child, but as a woman who had survived everything and still dared to love. The limousine rolled slowly down the familiar street. Rain tapped gently on the windows, and through the tinted glass, Emily could see her past. The cracked sidewalks, the old grocery store sign hanging by a thread, the faint outlines of a life she'd left behind. The air was heavy with memory. Are you sure about this? Leo asked softly, his voice calm but protective. Emily smiled faintly, her reflection ghosting in the glass. I faced fire before, Leo. I can face ghosts. He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining. Then let's do it together. The driver pulled to a stop in front of a small, fading house, the one Emily once called home. The paint peeled like old wounds, and the yard that used to bloom with her mother's roses was now just patches of dry earth. Emily stepped out, her heels sinking into the mud. For a long time, she just stood there, breathing in the silence of the street that had once known her tears. Then she knocked. The door opened slowly. It was her father, Mark Johnson. But time had stolen the shine from his eyes. His once strong shoulders were bent, his skin pale and lined. For a moment he simply stared, disbelief flickering across his face. Emily! Hi, Dad! He blinked rapidly, as if afraid she'd vanish. My God, you're real! Emily smiled, though her heart ached. I never stopped being real. From inside, a weak voice called out, Mark, who's at the door? A woman appeared, thinner, frail, her head wrapped in a scarf. It took Emily a moment to recognize her. The stepmother, the same woman who had turned her life into a nightmare. Now cancer had done what karma always promised, stripped her cruelty down to fragility. She froze when she saw Emily, her lips parted, eyes wide. Emily didn't speak. She only watched as the woman clutched her chest, guilt and shame fighting for space in her expression. Mark broke the silence. She's been sick. I sold most of the company for her treatments. We've had a hard time. Emily's voice was steady, not unkind. Life has a way of returning lessons, doesn't it? He looked down, unable to meet her eyes. From the hallway, a loud crash shattered the tension. A vase broken. Then a slurred voice, angry, bitter. Who the hell is at the door? Emily turned. Saye, her once beautiful stepsister, stumbled into view, eyes red, her hair messy. The smell of alcohol clung to her like perfume. When she saw Emily, she froze, then laughed a dry, hollow laugh. Well, well, look who decided to show up. The black trash turned superstar, Mark shouted. Sia, enough. But Emily raised a hand, calm. Let her speak. Sia sneered. What, you came back to gloat? To show off your perfect life while we're rotting here? Emily's tone was soft but sharp. No, Sia. I came to see what happens when cruelty finally eats itself. The room fell silent. Even the rain outside seemed to pause. Behind Sia, another figure appeared. A little girl, maybe 6, clutching a worn-out teddy bear. Her hair was tangled, her eyes hollow. Emily's breath caught. Who is she? Mark answered quietly, shame weighing his words. She's your stepmother's granddaughter. Sia's niece. Her mother, Lily, left her here after she was arrested. Emily froze. Arrested? Mark nodded slowly. She killed her boyfriend. Drugs, rage, I don't know anymore. The silence that followed was heavy, not with anger this time, but with sorrow, the kind that comes after truth finally explodes. Emily looked at the child again, a small, innocent echo of all the suffering adults had created. She crouched, meeting the girl's eyes. Hey there, she whispered gently. What's your name? Anna, the child murmured. Emily smiled faintly. That's a beautiful name. The little girl blinked. Are you an angel? Emily's heart cracked. No, sweetheart. Just someone who knows what it feels like to be forgotten. Later that evening, Emily sat alone in her old room, the one rebuilt after the fire. The walls were bare, but she could still smell the faint trace of ashes beneath the new paint. Leo found her there, sitting by the window, staring at the empty backyard. Are you okay? He asked softly. I thought I'd feel triumphant, she said. Seeing them broken, seeing karma work. But all I feel is sad. Leo placed a hand on her shoulder. That's because you've grown. Revenge was never your story. Resurrection was. She smiled at that, leaning into his warmth. You know, he added playfully, it's not too late to change your ending again. Emily turned to him, eyebrow raised. Change it how? He stood, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a small velvet box. When he opened it, the room seemed to shrink, all her past fading into the glow of a single diamond. Emily Johnson, he said softly, his voice trembling but sure. You walked through fire, through loss, through every reason to stop believing in love. And still, you chose light. Would you do me the honor of being my wife? Her breath caught. In her mind she saw flashes, her mother's smile, her childhood laughter, the flames, the tears, the scripts, the success. Every scar, every word, every night spent crying into pages that would one day change her life. And now this. Yes, she whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. 1,000 times yes. Leo slipped the ring on her finger, and outside the rain finally stopped. Weeks later, the world woke to headlines that read, Hollywood writer marries British royal, from orphan to princess. Photographers swarmed the palace gates, hungry for shots of the girl who had rewritten her destiny. But Emily wasn't thinking about fame. As she stood on the balcony overlooking the gardens of Oxfordshire, she thought only of one thing, her mother. Mom, she whispered to the wind, I made it. I finally came home. A soft breeze swept across her face, warm and sweet, like a blessing. And for the first time in her life, Emily didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was living. Years later, a little book would appear on bestseller lists around the world. Ashes of a Girl, the Emily Johnson story. It opened with one simple line. They tried to burn me, but I learned to write in fire. And with that, Emily's story, the girl who turned pain into power, became immortal. The camera panned over the city of Los Angeles, the city that had once ignored her cries, then later begged for her stories. Billboards lined Sunset Boulevard. The royal screenwriter, Emily Johnson's final film premieres tonight. Inside the Dolby Theater, the world glittered. Red carpet, flashing cameras, famous faces. But when Emily stepped out of the black limousine, the noise seemed to soften, as if even Hollywood paused to pay its respects. She was no longer the fragile girl who had once escaped fire. She was a woman of purpose, grace wrapped in power. Her gown shimmered gold beneath the lights, her smile calm, regal. Leo stood beside her, his tux sharp, his eyes full of quiet pride. Years hadn't dimmed his affection. If anything, time had deepened it. He whispered, "You ready, Mrs. Alexander?" Emily grinned. "Always." The crowd erupted as they walked down the carpet. Fans screamed her name. Cameras flashed. Journalists shouted questions. "Emily, what inspired your new movie? Is it true you're retiring? Any advice for young writers out there?" She stopped at that last question. Advice. Her gaze lifted toward the skyline, the same one she used to stare at from her tiny apartment window, praying for a chance. Then she smiled. "Tell the story that scares you. That's the one the world needs to hear." The crowd cheered. Inside the theater, the lights dimmed. Her final film, Ashes of a Girl, filled the screen. It told her story. The child who lost everything. The stepdaughter who was treated like dirt. The girl who was burned, betrayed, and buried, and still rose from her own ashes. When the credits rolled, the entire audience stood. Applause thundered. People wept openly. And in that moment, Emily realized she hadn't just told a story. She had started a movement. Weeks later, at the Royal Academy of Film and Arts in London, Emily stood before a room of young writers. Hundreds of them, wide-eyed, full of hope. Behind her was a massive screen displaying the words, "The Emily Foundation, empowering voices that the world ignored." She stepped to the podium. The crowd quieted. "When I was 12, she began, I thought my life ended with my mother's death. When I was 17, I thought it ended again. When my stepfamily made me their shadow. When I was burned and left for dead, I thought it was over for good." She paused, scanning the faces before her. "But what I didn't know was that endings are just stories waiting for new authors. I stopped letting people write mine." The crowd leaned in. I was called names. I was told my color, my voice, my face didn't belong in Hollywood. But the truth is, you don't need permission to shine. You just need courage to begin. Tears glistened in the audience. She continued, her voice steady and proud. "Today, every script this foundation funds will come from voices the world has ignored. Girls, dreamers, fighters, anyone who dares to turn pain into poetry. Because I learned one thing. It's not the fire that defines you. It's what you build from the ashes." Thunderous applause filled the hall. Leo rose, clapping the loudest, his eyes glistening with pride. And as Emily looked around, at the young dreamers, at the people she once was, she felt something rare and complete. She had become the woman she needed as a child. Later that night, on the balcony of the palace overlooking Oxfordshire Gardens, the air was soft and golden with the glow of sunset. Leo wrapped his arms around her waist. "So, Mrs. Alexander, you've conquered Hollywood and the crown. What's next?" Emily smiled, gazing at the horizon. "Maybe it's time to write something new." "A sequel?" he teased. She shook her head, eyes bright. "A legacy." As the wind carried her laughter into the open sky, the camera slowly pulled back, the palace lights shimmering beneath the stars. A soft voice, Emily's, echoed over the closing shot. "They tried to burn me, but I learned to set the world on fire instead." What do you think about Emily's incredible journey? From pain to power, from ashes to glory? If this story touched your heart, drop your thoughts in the comment section below. Would you forgive like Emily or walk away like a queen? Let's talk about it.